The story begins with an already aged swordsman. The man was about to turn 55. His body was worn out, his mind tired, and he no longer knew what he was doing with his own life. After all, that was the age when many retire. But to him, everything felt like nothing more than confirmation of complete failure. Suddenly, a horde of monsters appeared right in front of him, and he realized that those creatures would not give him a single second of rest. All he wanted was to understand why his life had been so miserable up to that point. As the monsters drew closer, the swordsman's mind wandered back to the past. The other warriors of his generation had been acclaimed with grand titles, such as Sword Saint or even God of the Sword, but he was known only as the old man with a sword, or in the worst case, the idiot swordsman. That was the only recognition he received, making it clear that there was no honor in his name, only scorn. The scene then shifted back, revealing the man's dark past when he was still a child and witnessed a woman being brutally slaughtered before his very eyes. He had no family and grew up in an orphanage. The name of that failed swordsman was Shin Sang-yoon. The woman who was about to die at the hands of a monster was his teacher. All she wanted was for him to escape alive, but Sang-yoon watched helplessly as she was crushed. As he cried, he could hear the other children screaming for help. Those children and his teacher were the only family he had ever known, and he lost everything that day when the collapse began. In his sky, monsters suddenly appeared and destroyed everything Sang-yoon had. Even so, he didn't fall into despair, because just as he was about to die, a knight with long hair appeared and saved him. The knight approached and asked if the boy was all right. In that moment, Sang-yoon believed he had witnessed a miracle, and even now, as he fought monsters, he still remembered the man who saved him, wishing one day to become just like him. For that reason, he trained with every bit of strength he had, but none of it seemed to make sense. No matter how many monsters he killed, he didn't grow stronger. He couldn't protect anything or anyone, and in the end, he even lost the knight who had inspired him. The weight of feeling useless was killing Sang-yoon inside, corroding everything that still remained of him. After defeating several monsters, his body began trembling violently, barely responding to his commands, and the situation seemed far too dangerous. As if misfortune itself were chasing him, a huge dragon appeared before him. While the swordsman thought of the life he had never lived, the family he never formed, the home he never built, the dragon struck him mercilessly. As he was hit, he sank deeper into the realization that his life was a failure, and all he wanted was to turn back time and change everything. Then, suddenly, the scene shifted, showing Shin Sang-yoon with his sword pierced through the dragon's body. The game system congratulated him for clearing the dungeon Ancient Dragon's Nest, but even he couldn't believe it. Worse still was realizing that he was putting in so much effort at nearly 60 years old. That thought left him deeply bitter. 30 years had passed since he began living as a swordsman, and his greatest achievement was being ranked among the top 100 in his country, which, in practice, meant being nothing more than a needle in a haystack. Even so, he was surprised to see that his reward was a skill book. Since he had consumed artifacts in the past, he wondered whether he could eat this one as well. At that moment, a portal opened, and out came a constellation known as the Late Model Student, a blonde man who congratulated Sang-yoon for his effort and praised the final strike, calling it flawless. Sang-yoon was grateful for the recognition and surprised to learn that the constellation wished to form a contract with him, even if he was only a fifth-rate swordsman. The Late Model Student declared that he would double all artifact and title attributes once Sang-yoon reached level 850, and could even triple them at level 900. The problem was that Sang-yoon's current level was only 650, so those bonuses were still far off, which left the swordsman quite anxious. Even so, the constellation encouraged him to eat the skill book, and Sang-yoon decided to do it. After all, this was the only skill he had received since his awakening. To better understand his powers, he had once tried cooking and eating artifacts, even frying some, but never felt any difference. He was clearly a bit crazy in the head, and by the time he finished all those useless experiments, 30 years had already gone by. It was only much later that he realized that by synchronizing mana with an artifact of the appropriate rank, his artifact-devouring ability would activate. But the old man figured it out far too late. While others grew stronger immediately upon awakening, Sang-yoon only understood all of this once he was already entering old age. Now, as he looked at the magic book, he wondered if there might be some sort of instruction that could guide him more clearly. The late model student admitted that there was little information available about Sang-yoon's unique ability, so he couldn't help directly. Still, he suggested the swordsman try synchronizing mana once more, since he seemed to have plenty of time to spare. This infuriated Sang-yoon, his eyes filling with tears, as it felt like the constellation hadn't yet realized that he was already nearly 60 years old. If he had had a child early on, he might already have grandchildren by now. That thought made the constellation feel guilty. He apologized, but Sang-yun explained that he had done nothing wrong. The real problem was that Sang-yun had lived a life full of regrets. He had never forgotten the back of that knight who once saved him. He had tried his best to become like him, but now he was simply tired and exhausted. If he were just a little younger, everything would be different, and that gave the constellation an idea. In the end, Sang-yun decided he would retire, but before that, he asked the late model student to start recording everything. Then suddenly, the constellation did something unexpected that left the swordsman completely stunned. Sang-yun's last memory had been of himself at 55 years old, but now he realized that the constellation had used the very essence he himself had developed, activating the process of regression. The scene then shifted to a reporter named Park Jung-min, also known as Player G, who was trying to learn more about the dungeons, portals, and how the Awakened functioned. The CEO of Hyunjung Corporation, named Han Hyunjung, confirmed the reporter's questions and explained that the portals were alternate dimensions connected to unknown regions that needed to be explored by players. Meanwhile, Sang-yun watched everything on television, overjoyed to realize that he had truly regressed. He only fully understood the situation after 4 days, still somewhat confused when he realized he had gone back 30 years into the past. After that, he lost consciousness, and when he woke up, he was in his old apartment 30 years earlier, now in the body of his 25-year-old self, carrying all of his memories. He had imagined this possibility countless times, but now he believed his regression could only have been caused by a miracle from the constellation. There was no other reasonable explanation. Even though he was still a little confused, that didn't matter to Sang-yun. He decided to act right away. At that time, he possessed a Venomoth dagger, a bronze artifact, and felt lucky to have obtained that item during that period. Even with its low rank, he was well aware of the dagger's hidden ability. Its absorption rate was only 10%, very low, and that happened because he hadn't used it in a while. But Sang-yun didn't care about that. What really mattered was the hidden skill, so he performed a mana synchronization with a Venomoth dagger, which briefly altered his appearance and took him directly into the space of unconsciousness. The space of unconsciousness was a place he had to cross in order to devour an artifact, and every time he went there, he grew nervous. Suddenly, a dish with a whole roasted chicken appeared right in front of him, signaling that the preparations to absorb the Venomoth dagger were complete. The system confirmed that it was roast chicken with olive oil, and Sang-yun felt deeply relieved that it was normal food, since he feared it might have been some disgusting insect. He began eating to absorb the dagger, permanently gaining 2 agility points and unlocking a hidden ability called Demonic Strike. Since he had absorbed the Venomoth dagger, it disappeared forever, which he thought was a shame, but he was satisfied to have obtained the ability he had planned for. Now it was time to begin acting. Then the scene shifted to a gigantic gate that had appeared in the middle of the street. It was dungeon number 85. The Yoon Daekyung team was about to enter when the leader of the transport group ran in panic to inform the team's captain that one of their members had gone missing. It was a rookie who had joined just 4 days earlier. His name was Shin Sang-yun. However, the leader of the main team showed no concern, since he had already decided that Sang-yun would be joining his squad. This shocked the transport leader, because it meant Sang-yun would no longer be part of the support group, but would instead be placed among the main players. The captain then asked if the man had any problem with that. The jealous transport leader clearly did, since Sang-yun had awakened only recently and hadn't even completed the player academy. To him, putting someone like that in the main squad was improbable and even dangerous, since it could unbalance the team. The leader of the players grew irritated and asked if the other wasn't supposed to be responsible for handling everything. The transport man fell silent and apologized, but he wasn't the only one confused. One of the young men there also wanted to know what was going on, but the leader preferred not to worry. After all, if anyone had to die, it would be Shin Sang-yun. He was using the swordsman as bait, hoping he would die quickly so the others would stop complaining. At that moment, Sang-yun appeared and introduced himself as a player, surprising some of the team members. While the leader simply smiled, thinking it was excellent, Sang-yun noticed that everyone around him was being very expressive. He had expected some kind of reaction, but he hadn't imagined they wouldn't even try to hide the faces they were making. The group's leader seemed pleased. After all, the rookie had finally arrived and showed enthusiasm as he greeted him. However, he soon noticed that Sang-yun was carrying a longsword, which caught his attention. The protagonist explained that he had watched many YouTube videos about using a longsword, which made the leader suspicious, since that type of weapon was one of the hardest to handle properly. Even so, Sang-yun assured him that he would try his best to protect the group and only needed a little trust. The leader thought that was wonderful and laughed heartily, and soon everyone was preparing to begin exploring the dungeon. The group marched with energy, especially the leader, who shouted and displayed excitement excitement, as if he were about to show off what he was capable of. Upon entering the portal, they immediately found the dungeon's atmosphere strange, so the leader ordered everyone to wait at the entrance. Many people were eager to see what awaited inside. After Sang Yun stepped in, the leader reflected on what the swordsman had said, especially about learning through YouTube videos. To him, that was ridiculous, since a dungeon was no game. He began to think Sang Yun was just another arrogant awakener who thought he could already act like a player. He then concluded that this rookie needed to die soon, and given the dungeon's strategy, which was filled with orcs, this place was known as the Wall of Perdition, especially cruel to beginners. The leader smiled, imagining Sang Yun would soon learn his place. But then the scene shifted abruptly, revealing the same leader completely shocked. He had underestimated Sang Yun, thinking the young man was a complete fool, yet what the swordsman had just done was insane, taking down several monsters at once. The leader was left confused, wanting to know who this Sang Yun really was, the man who had destroyed the dungeon's boss with such ease, something he truly couldn't believe. Orcs were common monsters in games, novels, and fantasy films. They were familiar creatures, but precisely for that reason, surrounded by prejudice. Many players believed orcs were weak, since compared to dragons or more exotic monsters, they seemed like nothing more than brutish and violent thugs. This led many overconfident rookies to make the mistake of underestimating them and recklessly attacking. In practice, orcs stood about 2.5 meters tall and weighed around 180 kilos. They were straightforward, brutal beings with overwhelming physical strength, capable of tearing a human body apart with their bare hands. That was why they truly represented a wall of lamentations for beginners. As the group advanced through the dungeon, Yoon Dae-kyung made it clear to Sang Yun that even as a rookie, no one would make things easy for him. The swordsman already knew that. After all, in any group, no one went easy on anyone. The leader of the transport squad muttered behind his back that Sang Yun had barely awakened and was already trying to act like a player, calling him arrogant. But Sang Yun simply replied that he would do his best, since he expected no special treatment. Still, the other players didn't just want him to try, they wanted him to perform. In the end, Sang Yun asked if he could take the front line if a monster appeared, which many thought was some kind of joke. However, suddenly a giant orc appeared. This would be Sang Yun's first battle since turning back time, and he was determined to face the monster. The orc charged at one of the players, who managed to block with his shield. That player thought Sang Yun was insane for wanting to fight with a longsword, since his movements looked far too slow. Even so, Sang Yun declared that he could handle the monster alone, which only further irritated the player, who thought he was way too cocky. At that moment, the leader tried to show off, shoving the orc with force and knocking it to the ground, drawing everyone's attention. He scolded the two, asking if they were there for a stroll and telling them to pay more attention. The others began to admire Dae-kyung as a leader, while the player who had argued with Sang Yun apologized. The orc quickly got up and tried to attack Dae-kyung, who blocked with his shield and struck it with his sword. Everyone was impressed, thinking he had defeated the monster in an instant. However, the orc wasn't dead yet. Laughing, it tried to attack again. Dae-kyung blocked the blow, but he had underestimated the enemy's strength and staggered under the impact. Sang Yun observed everything carefully, and while he acknowledged that Dae-kyung was the strongest among them, he knew his level was only 50, and that he hadn't even struck the monster's vital point. Realizing how resilient the orc was, Dae-kyung attempted another strike and managed to bring it down. Everyone cheered the victory, and the leader boasted that the orc was nothing special. Seeing the group in good spirits, Dae-kyung suggested they keep going and ride the momentum. But several creatures began appearing all at once, showing that the real battle was only just beginning. Among them emerged high-level orcs, and one of them was even wearing armor. Everyone froze, not knowing what to do. The atmosphere shifted completely, and the group leader believed that retreating was the best option at that moment, all in the name of the team's safety. Dae-kyung assessed the situation and saw that there was no chance of successfully facing those orcs, but Sang Yun thought differently. He wanted to fight them, and asked for permission to do so. The other members were confused, thinking he was crazy, since no one understood why someone who had awakened so recently would want to do something so suicidal. Dae-kyung realized Sang Yun was excited because of his recent awakening, but that didn't change the fact that it was extremely dangerous. Even so, the protagonist ignored the leader's orders and charged alone against the band of orcs. Everyone was in shock, believing he would be killed instantly. However, Sang Yun delivered a strike so powerful that it practically split the upper body of one of the orcs in half, as if provoking the others. He found the longsword surprising and realized he was truly enjoying that weapon. The group was stunned by what he had done, since up until that moment, he had only been a level 1 player. The orcs grew furious and began attacking without hesitation. Yet Sang Yun, despite his low level, possessed vast experience. He had fought many similar monsters in his youth, and now he was proving he still remembered how to fight. He faced all those creatures with skill and began defeating them one by one. The group, watching the unbelievable scene, started to question if this was really Shin Sung-yun, since he was massacring all the orcs alone. Eventually, only one remained, the strongest of them all, an armored orc much larger and tougher than the rest. Without hesitation, the armored orc charged at the protagonist. Sang-yun tried several strikes, but his cuts barely scratched the creature's skin. Dae-kyung watched in disbelief, realizing the orc's hide was absurdly thick, fearing the protagonist wouldn't be able to handle it. However, with calm precision, Sang-yun dodged all attacks, and then used his demonic strike ability, hitting the orc directly. The monster began trembling violently since the ability carried a stunning effect. Taking advantage of the opening, Sang-yun cleanly severed the creature's head in a single motion, making it roll to a stop right in front of Dae-kyung, who still couldn't believe what he was seeing. Everyone knew Sang-yun had awakened only 3 days ago, and such a stunning ability wasn't common. Even renowned players could barely stun an enemy for less than 2 seconds. Moreover, the mastery he demonstrated with a longsword was unbelievable for someone of such a low level. The group began to consider that maybe the story about him learning from YouTube videos was actually true. Dae-kyung couldn't accept that someone who had awakened so recently was using a stun against an uncommon orc and wanted to know how he had acquired that ability. At that moment, the system congratulated Sang-yun, informing him that he had leveled up and met the requirements to receive a title. He obtained the title, The Dog Who Doesn't Know Fear, ranked F, whose effect granted +5 to evasion. Although he had been expecting to level up, the title was unexpected. He also received 1 status point to distribute and already knew exactly where to invest it. In his previous life, he had realized far too late that the luck attribute was essential, as it directly influenced the success rate of skills and the chance of obtaining rare artifacts. For him now, investing in luck was no longer a choice but a necessity. At that moment, Dae-kyung asked the swordsman who had returned 30 years into the past if he was really Shin Sung-yun, and also wanted to confirm if that ability had truly been a stun, trying to figure out where something so powerful had come from. Sang-yun, on the other hand, was finally enjoying the advantages of this new life, but couldn't reveal the truth to anyone, so he gave an excuse, claiming he had received the ability upon awakening. Dae-kyung was furious at that explanation, which made no sense, and thought the protagonist was trying to trick him. He asserted that Sang-yun wouldn't get away with such an easy answer, convinced he had found a rare artifact, perhaps even diamond rank or higher. With a slight smile, Sang-yun asked if the leader wanted to take a look at his longsword, and Dae-kyung accepted, unable to refuse. Upon examining the sword, he saw it was worn down, a common artifact with nothing special. That left him even more frustrated, since it became clear that the ability came directly from Sang-yun, not from any equipment. Dae-kyung's frustration grew, as he had 2 years of dungeon experience, had already reached level 50, and still did not possess such a skill. Now, with Sang-yun's performance, it was certain that a large portion of that day's rewards would go to him. Just then, one of the members called the leader, informing him that the mid-boss had appeared. Dae-kyung decided to move forward and told the protagonist that, thanks to him, eliminating the orcs had been easy, but asked him not to get carried away next time. Trying to belittle him, he said that ability would be useless against the next enemy, the dreaded demon orc, which immediately caught Sang-yun's attention. Sang-yun had nearly forgotten the true reason why he had turned back time and decided to join that team again. He looked at Yoon Dae-kyung and asked if he was afraid, questioning if he could try to kill the demon orc on his own. This question made the leader's eyes widen, as Sang-yun wanted to know if he could keep the artifact reward if he managed to defeat it. After all, he believed the reward should belong to whoever eliminated the enemy. What Sang-yun was really after was the Scarlet Stone, a rare artifact that could be obtained with a small chance of dropping when defeating a demon orc. However, even if someone killed hundreds of those creatures, the chance of finding the stone was extremely low. In fact, it was considered one of the hardest items to obtain in the game. Still, in Sang-yun's previous life, he remembered clearly when his team had miserably failed against that orc, and another team showed up shortly after, defeated the enemy, and obtained the Scarlet Stone. They bragged about it in front of everyone. Sang-yun also remembered seeing the members of that other team congratulating their leader, who looked radiant for obtaining such a valuable artifact. He said he would sell the Scarlet Stone and make a fortune. At that time, Sang-yun had no idea what ability the item possessed, but now he knew it granted the delay ability, something absolutely necessary for him at that moment, now that he had gone back in time. That was why he needed to make sure the artifact would be his. He also remembered that Yoon Dae-kyung's team used a contribution-based distribution system, and for that reason, if he personally defeated the demon orc, he would have the right to keep the artifact. The delay ability was something he could not afford to miss again. Still, he knew that, being a novice player, speaking so confidently and arrogantly would not be well received by the others. Two of the group members looked at Sang Yun in shock, thinking he was completely out of his mind. They believed he was being overly full of himself for someone who had just started and had only gotten lucky so far. Despite that, the group leader decided that everyone should calm down, and to everyone's surprise, accepted Sang Yun's request. This left the others stunned, but there was a condition. If the group failed to defeat the demon orc, then Sang Yun would have to fight it alone. In other words, the leader had only agreed because he believed it would be a way to let the protagonist die. In the end, for Sang Yun, it was simpler than expected. Now he could stay out of the initial fight. Meanwhile, Yoon Dae-kyung thought Sang Yun was nothing more than an arrogant boy, excited just because he had managed to acquire a powerful ability, but he was sure they would soon shut his mouth, showing him what real experience was. With confidence, Dae-kyung opened the door to the mid-boss's chamber. On the other side was the demon orc, shrouded in a dark and frightening aura. The atmosphere of the room changed completely, the air grew heavy, and it was clear that this boss was thirsty for blood. Even so, Yoon Dae-kyung ordered everyone into position. Believing that, despite being intimidating, it would be easy to defeat according to the guides, he asked the others to circle around and hold the rear formation, still convinced that Sang Yun wouldn't be able to do anything on his own. Thus, Dae-kyung decided to advance toward the mid-boss to deliver the first strike, but the result was disastrous. He was struck hard, his head bleeding, and he fell to the ground without understanding what had happened. Meanwhile, Sang Yun simply observed from the corner of the room in silence, remembering that in his previous life, Dae-kyung had done exactly the same thing and failed in the same way. The other players panicked, shouting the leader's name and asking what they should do. As if things continued like that, they would all be doomed to death. First, there had been the armored orc, and now the mid-boss appeared. Dae-kyung began to realize that he could not rely 100% on the guides he had read, so he decided the best thing to do was retreat. He gave the order for the group to fall back, which made Sang Yun quite pleased, but seeing the smile on the young man's face only made the leader more furious. Even so, he preferred to stick to the plan and give him the promised chance. Pointing to the direction the others should take, Dae-kyung told Sang Yun that he had already warned him before, and that he shouldn't blame anyone if he died. Now he would have his opportunity, and Dae-kyung didn't want the others to waste time worrying. With a determined look, Sang Yun assured the leader that he would not die. Wielding his longsword as the mid-boss charged toward him, he compared his attributes to the enemy's and knew he couldn't win in a straightforward fight, but he had something far more valuable, his vast experience. With that, he managed to block the boss's first strike, leaving everyone in shock to witness it. However, his hands went numb from the impact, and for now, he could only focus on dodging. It was then that he noticed the scarlet stone bound by chains to the demon orc's body. The reason for Sang Yun's obsession with that artifact was simple. The special ability of the stone, known as delay, combined perfectly with his own stun ability. At present, his stun lasted 2 seconds, which was already useful but had little room for growth. On the other hand, his unique ability to consume artifacts allowed him to combine different effects. If he could obtain an ability capable of stacking stuns indefinitely, he could create a strategy of infinite stun, something that would change everything. The ability called delay would make that possible. That was why he needed the demon orc to keep attacking him, which only enraged the boss further, charging at him again with violence. Taking advantage of an opening in the attack, Sang Yun activated his stun, and the enemy entered a paralyzed state for 2 seconds. Dae-kyung watched in disbelief, finding it absurd that even a dungeon boss could be affected by the ability. For Sang Yun, orcs were predictable creatures, but he was caught off guard when the demon orc landed a powerful kick. He managed to block it partially, but the impact was so great that it dragged him across the ground, tearing up chunks of stone beneath his feet. At that moment, he remembered something he had forgotten. That boss had self-regeneration, which caused the stun effect to be cancelled before its full duration. The real problem was that, to stun the monster again, he would have to wait 15 seconds, and that was exactly why he needed the delay skill. Now, he had no other choice but to face the enemy head-on, without relying on stuns. Even so, he managed to quickly block the demonic orc's attack and began fighting on equal footing, despite the massive difference in attributes. The group merely watched, while one of the players warned the leader that they needed to leave immediately. They thought Shin Sang-yun's ability was no longer working. Dae-kyung grew increasingly frustrated, trying to understand how this was possible. But unlike the others, he began to see the situation differently, even without being able to stun the enemy at that moment. And even while facing someone far stronger, Sang-yun stood firm and wore a confident expression. This left the leader deeply confused, questioning whether that boy was really a novice, while Sang-yun recalled something important from his past life. When a warrior lacks sufficient attributes, he learns to channel all his strength into a single strike, ignoring the sensation of cutting and even using the enemy's own force against him. That was exactly what he decided to do at that instant. Gathering everything he knew, he attacked with precision, shattering the demonic orc's axe and piercing its body. With that, he leveled up significantly and received a new rank E title, called Demon Hunter. Sang Yun's new title had a special effect that increased HP regeneration fivefold. Now, he already had two important titles, and began to realize that this was the true power of a solitary hunter. Shortly after, Yoon Dae-kyung's party members approached. The team leader was utterly shocked, while the protagonist already suspected that a potential problem was coming his way. To avoid an awkward conversation, he decided to fake it, pretending the fight had been extremely difficult. He feigned despair, claiming he had nearly died, and that without Dae-kyung dealing damage to the boss, he would not have been able to defeat it. Because of this, everyone began to believe that Dae-kyung had been essential to the victory, while the team leader himself remained utterly baffled. Sang Yun gave him a subtle look, smiling slightly, hoping he would realize this was an attempt to save him and preserve his reputation in front of the others. At that moment, everyone was surprised when the Scarlet Stone finally appeared. In the end, Sang Yun only wanted Yoon Dae-kyung to fulfill the promise he had made before the battle. Dae-kyung acknowledged his defeat and accepted that there was no way to deny Sang Yun's merits. He then told everyone to prepare, as it was now time to face the final boss. After the victory over the mid-boss, they proceeded toward the end of the dungeon. Meanwhile, Sang Yun was quite happy, as everything had gone according to plan, and it was finally time to test the powers of the Scarlet Stone. Once again, the protagonist was transported to the Rift of Unconsciousness, where the meal this time was braised pork with side dishes, a combination that brought him comforting memories. He felt satisfied while absorbing the Scarlet Artifact, which increased his strength and HP attributes by 2 points. As expected, he received the special effect called Delay, and the system confirmed that he could combine this effect with his other skills. Sang Yun grew nervous when testing the fusion, though he wasn't sure why. He combined his stun skill with the new Delay effect. Now he could activate the second stun before the first one ended, making the second guaranteed. The third activation had a 90% chance of extending the effect, the fourth had 60%, and the fifth had 30%. This meant he now had a guaranteed 4-second stun, something that left him quite surprised. Even if it was just a theory, the results were real. At that moment, Yoon Dae-kyung approached and said the next challenge was to face the final boss, the feared Orc Berserker. Sang Yun thought the leader wanted to leave him out of the battle, but that wasn't the case. Dae-kyung admitted that if he couldn't make use of an ally's talent like Sang Yun's, then he didn't deserve to be the leader. He said he didn't feel worthy and that he was counting on him from now on. The protagonist wanted to confirm if their previous conditions still held, and Dae-kyung confirmed firmly, keeping his word. One of the members announced that the group was ready to enter the final boss's chamber. Dae-kyung told everyone to stay alert, but that player began glaring at Sang Yun with a hostile look. The protagonist didn't understand why and was simply surprised by it. The leader seemed eager to finish everything quickly, since he planned to take the group out for drinks afterward. Still, Sang Yun kept wondering why he was being stared at that way. Soon after, the scene shifted to the interior of the final boss chamber, in dungeon number 85, where an enormous creature let out a loud, threatening roar. The Orc Berserker was far larger than any of the previous enemies. Even so, Dae-kyung seemed to have learned nothing from past mistakes and declared that he would attack first, but the protagonist reacted, telling everyone to follow him. This time, he felt ready, since the Orc Berserker had less resistance to skills than the demonic orc, which made stunning it easier to apply. All he needed was to stay calm. It was only when he was about to strike that Sang Yun realized he had spoken with authority and confidence in front of everyone, something he had never done in his life. When he was young, he had always been afraid, and when he grew older, he merely tried to survive. But now he wanted to change everything. He no longer wished to live that way, and was determined to transform both his weak past and his future. That was why he needed to display overwhelming strength right there, which left Dae-kyung shocked as he watched him charge forward alone. With a massive slash, Sang Yun struck the Orc Berserker and initiated the 4-second stun. During that time, he shouted for everyone to attack without fear. The final boss was then struck by a devastating sequence of blows from the entire group, and in this way, they managed to defeat it much more easily than expected. Thanks to Sang Yun's performance, everyone was able to save resources and complete the dungeon efficiently. Now, the group's players began to take an interest in him, asking whether he belonged to any fixed party, hoping to have him around in the future. Sang Yun was incredulous at how opportunistic they were. He had also leveled up again and received a rank D title called With Overwhelming Strength, which granted the effect of increasing the duration of negative statuses by 10%. In his previous life, he had never obtained titles so easily, but even with this progress, he still felt small compared to the legendary swordsman known as Kyung-soo, the Phantom Swordsman. Known as the Collector of Titles and the Perfection of the Sword, he was considered the strongest player in Korea and bore many nicknames. In just 2 years since the rise of the players, he had already surpassed level 500. In Sang Yun's past life, that man was a distant idol, someone unattainable. But now, he he was almost certain that he could reach him. If he went all out and pushed his growth to the maximum, he believed he had a chance. Daekyung found Sang-yun's behavior very strange, and in the end, handed him an item, leaving the protagonist quite surprised. He wanted to know since when Daekyung had started giving things to others. But the team leader thought it was only fair, since Sang-yun had carried the entire party. Besides, it was just a bronze-level item and not that valuable. Sang-yun realized Daekyung's honesty was almost painful. It was clear he was stingy. The leader himself admitted that if it had been expensive, he wouldn't have given it away. Daekyung only handed over that item because he was sure they would never meet again. Painful as it was, the team leader already knew this. He understood that the protagonist had realized the world they lived in was different. Meanwhile, a blonde player grew furious upon seeing Daekyung give Sang-yun an item even after he had already obtained the Scarlet Stone. All that just because the protagonist had displayed some skill. He thought it was completely unfair and vowed to become strong enough to humiliate them all. The scene then shifted to Shin Sang-yun's home, where he was happy to have earned much more money than he ever did as a porter. In addition to the money, he had received a bonus, the Berserker's Ring, which boosted the wearer's stamina. Even though it was bronze level, the ring also granted a mild special effect. It consumed 1 mana per second, but reduced the weight of all equipped artifacts to a single gram. At that moment, Sang-yun understood why it was only a bronze-level item. Ordinary players would take weeks before they could even wield a sword like that. But he was not an ordinary player. Even though he had only discovered his abilities after turning 50, he had studied far more because of it. In his past life, he had already used artifacts that required mana, and the results were shocking. The special effects of those artifacts usually came with penalties, but those penalties became null once absorbed. So he quickly used his absorption skill. He didn't care about penalties. What he wanted was to accumulate power. The scene then shifted to a private club called H, located in the Gangnam district of Seoul. The blonde player, filled with envy, was furious as he explained to the others what Sang-yun had done. But the man listening grew irritated with all the noise, not understanding why he should take revenge on Sang-yun for him. The blonde player made up excuses, claiming that Sang-yun might even be rich, but the fat man still didn't see where he was going with it. Then the group's leader, a man with a brutal scar, cut off the blonde's ear, making it clear that they weren't slaves or personal assistants. Right after, he poured alcohol in the man's ear, telling him he would have to pay for the service and charging the price of 1 ear. He then asked where Sang-yun was at that moment. The scene shifted again, this time to the Jamsil 4-3 training grounds, where Sang-yun was with his sword. He hadn't expected the Berserker's Ring to taste like cold cucumber soup, and he hated it. But in the end, the effort was worth it. He could generate his longsword repeatedly as if it were nothing, catching it with ease. It really was lighter. The weight reduction had no cooldown and was permanent. For now, he decided just to carry the sword around to get used to it. The protagonist's next step was to attract the attention of the constellations. Since each player could only have one constellation, he needed to be very careful. The ideal choice would be one that matched his main attribute, luck. That would be perfect. But at that moment, his attributes weren't yet high enough to draw the attention of a constellation, so all that remained was to train like crazy. Soon after, the scene shifted to him completely exhausted and frustrated. He had nearly died for real, having gone 3 days without sleep, training non-stop and still driving for hours. At least he managed to gain a skill, two-handed sword training, which increased adaptability with all swords except daggers and one-handed blades. Finally, the scene shifted to a dungeon exclusive for solo players, dungeon number 101. If it had been in Seoul, Sang-yun believed the queue to get in would have been enormous. So in the end, driving long distances wasn't that bad. Sang-yun noticed a black car parked in the forest. He recognized the vehicle, as it had followed him all the way to the mountain road. He had no idea what those men wanted, but in the end, he decided to settle everything inside the dungeon, so he entered. However, the men from that car, sent by the envious blonde player, entered right after him. Sang-yun, who had already expected them, made it clear that this dungeon was exclusive to solo players and that this place was his. The men underestimated him, thinking he was just another idiot. But, as Sang-yun suspected, that group wasn't an ordinary formation. He quickly grabbed his sword, noticing they had neither healers nor mages, which eliminated any chance of sustain. They were only swordsmen and archers, a pack of hyenas that hunted humans. The men made it clear that the best part was that Sang-yun would die there and no one would ever know. But in his past life, Sang-yun had already faced groups like that, ones that were almost wiped out by the player association. He knew very well how they operated, and among them, the most dangerous was always the archer, the one who wanted to finish things as quickly as possible. Sang-yun wondered if they really thought he had been waiting there for nothing. He was certain that soon there would be 4 corpses on the ground, and he wanted to see how they would deal with that once outside. His words enraged the men. The leader, with his grotesque scar, tried to resolve things the simple way. Sang-yun just laughed, thinking it would be better if the subordinates listened to their boss. But one of them lost his temper and tried to shut him up, swinging a massive greatsword. The law of the strongest was the only rule that applied inside a dungeon. Monsters had always threatened Sang-yun's life, just as humans who tried to steal his artifacts did. People like these men had always been a danger to his survival. After all, if you're weak, you'll be devoured, and dungeons are essentially lawless lands. If you want to live, you have to kill. That was the most important lesson from Sang Yun's past life, and it was the truth of that world. With his long sword, he cleaved the man in two. From that point on, everything that happened would be self-defense. Gripping his sword tightly, he wanted to see whether the others would attack or not. It was a clear provocation, and soon the others charged at him. The group's leader backed away, trying to create distance, ordering the others to cover him until they could form up. The archer couldn't believe Sang Ho, the big guy, had been killed. After all, he was level 100, and even if he was an idiot, he shouldn't have gone down so easily. Sang Yun had only awakened recently, so it made no sense. Sang Yun swung his sword with such force that it created wind around him, and he wanted to know where those guys were heading. The archer tried to attack him, thinking he was a monster, but Sang Yun broke the arrows as if it were nothing. That impressed the archer, who couldn't believe what he was seeing. The protagonist then threw his massive sword like a spear, leaving everyone confused about who or what he really was. The leader saw an opportunity, thinking Sang Yun was unarmed and therefore vulnerable. He ordered the others to attack, but Sang Yun killed the archer and quickly retrieved his longsword. Even so, the other two were already about to strike him. However, one of the henchmen froze in shock upon realizing Sang Yun was completely suspended in the air, as if doing calisthenics with his own sword. The henchman ended up hitting his own companion, who was already lying dead on the ground. A brutal scene. After defeating all the men sent by the jealous player, Sang Yun increased his stats. He hadn't wanted a confrontation, but he ended up gaining good rewards. In terms of power, he was now at the level of a player around level 50 or higher. He no longer remembered how much time had passed since he returned to the past. On top of that, he now possessed the Ring of Recovery, which had a powerful special effect. It used 10 mana to instantly remove all negative effects from its wearer. He had taken this item from the first opponent he defeated, that Sang Ho, never imagining he would find an artifact with such power. He quickly synchronized his mana with it. The scene then shifted to the inner entrance of dungeon number 101, where several goblins awaited. Sang Yun stood there with his long sword in hand, but something was different. His eyes were blindfolded, and he was thinking about the condition to acquire a title called Lucky Day, which required him to defeat over 500 monsters while blindfolded. Madness comparable to getting involved with a policeman's wife. He only wanted to know when the monsters would appear, until he heard the sound of a goblin approaching. He needed to stay attentive to the flow of the wind and the sounds around him, maintaining focus in a state of absolute concentration. This way, he realized he was starting to adapt. 4 goblins tried to attack him at once, and he destroyed them in a single strike. He enjoyed the feeling of slicing through those creatures. Suddenly, one goblin fired an arrow at him, but Sang Yun caught it as if it were nothing. He was in danger, but thanks to that situation, memories from the past resurfaced, and somehow his perception awakened. Now, he could sense the presence of many goblins around him and was determined to kill them all in pursuit of his new title. Sang Yun began a true bloodbath, killing countless goblins with ease. His level rose quickly, and amid the carnage, he obtained a rank D title called Lucky Day, exactly what he had been aiming for. This title allowed him to gain 0.1 luck points per monster defeated, up to a total of plus 10 points. Some goblins appeared and found dozens of corpses lying on the ground, but with a psychotic glare, Sang Yun thought it best to kill them too, to stack more stats. After defeating them, he had practically transformed into the Joker himself, enjoying the slaughter, and his eyes gleamed as if made of money. He had raised his luck to 30 solely thanks to that title. That was the reason for his happiness. The profit he had gained was immeasurable. The atmosphere around him began to grow darker, but he was radiant, for he was finally about to get out of renting life. Suddenly, 3 constellations appeared before him. The caretaker of the corrupted dimension asked if Sang Yun wasn't more interested in spreading misery than in gaining luck. The pilgrim of the great space was impressed with his performance and wanted to talk, while the goddess of fortune smiled and reached out her hand to him. Sang Yun grew excited. Not only had he been fast, but he had managed to catch the attention of 3 constellations at once. He wondered if they had enjoyed the little show he had put on. But then the goddess of fortune stopped smiling, which worried Sang Yun, making him think he might have come across as too arrogant. He didn't know what to think, as nothing like this had happened in his previous life. Still, the goddess soon smiled again, catching him off guard. She was intrigued, saying she had never seen such a lucky swordsman before. This was a relief for Sang Yun, as it meant the 3 constellations were truly interested in forming a contract. Still, he thought it best to take some time to confirm his decision. The caretaker of the corrupted dimension praised his hidden cruelty, being a constellation geared toward killers, while the pilgrim of the great space was curious about Sang Yun's true intentions. The only thing the protagonist knew about him was that this constellation only appeared before players with the potential to become saints. So he assumed the pilgrim's presence was linked to the popularity of the goddess of fortune, who was beloved even among other constellations. The goddess of fortune explained that she had no specific desires and promised that even if he chose another constellation at that moment, she could still make a contract with him in the future. This surprised Sang Yun. He almost forgot an important detail. There was a legendary archer known as the Miracle Archer, Hashimoto Yuki, who was capable of hitting any target, even in an empty room. His arrows never ran out thanks to the blessings of the world, all because of his constellation. This archer was the most praised among all archers. His destructive powers and high luck attribute were astonishing. While many thought his feats were exaggerated, in truth it was all thanks to his two constellations, and the one who allowed the impossible to become possible was none other than the goddess of fortune. Now, with 3 constellations before him, Sang Yun needed time to make the best decision, but all of them urged him to forget his worries and choose his destiny. The problem was that he couldn't completely trust them. He didn't doubt that the goddess of fortune was amazing, but if no other constellation appeared afterward, that choice would define the rest of his life. In his first journey, it had taken 10 years before a constellation sought him out, and it was only the late model student. When that one appeared, it was like a ray of light for Sang Yun, who believed the future would finally improve. But nothing changed. He remained miserable until the age of 55. He had never known how powerful a constellation could be, all because of those absurd requirements. And even though the power of a constellation was essential to a player's career, he had never managed to use it properly. In the end, he only managed to return to the past thanks to the late model student, and for that he felt grateful. But he also understood that he might not get another chance. So he needed to choose carefully among 3 paths: sacred powers, destruction, or luck. That was how he decided to sign a contract with the goddess of fortune. Even if he were to die, the contract would remain valid for 30 years. 15 friendly constellations congratulated his decision and wished him good luck. But not everything was perfect. 3 hostile constellations, who had planned to recruit him, declared they would do everything in their power to hinder his progress. Still, Sang Yun simply wished good luck for himself and for the goddess, holding her hand. The goddess of fortune was pleased with his decision and asked him to choose a wish. The first option was to make all of his attacks critical hits. The second granted him automatic unlocking of hidden effects when obtaining unique rank artifacts or higher. The third guaranteed a 100% chance of obtaining artifacts from bosses or mid-bosses. He was completely shocked by the level of these abilities, but there was more. The fourth option allowed him, upon leveling up, to increase 2 attributes at once if he invested in luck. Obviously, he was left confused with so many choices. The goddess of fortune wanted to know what Sang Yun would do about the other constellations' offers. He thought it best to let them go. The pilgrim of the great space said he would wait until their next encounter, while the caretaker of the corrupted dimension promised to kill him at the first opportunity. Even so, the goddess of fortune was happy that he had brought order to the situation. With the effects of the contract, Sang Yun no longer needed to worry. All he had to do was stay calm, and a better opportunity would eventually appear. The scene shifted to dungeon number 101, inside the final boss room, where Sang Yun was fighting at full strength. The goddess of fortune was watching everything closely. Sang Yun underestimated the boss, thinking it wasn't much, until the enemy managed to block his strike. The boss was a goblin lord, completely consumed by greed. He broke Sang Yun's defense and forced him to retreat, applying the overload condition. That left the swordsman very surprised, since he was finally encountering that condition in battle. He was excited about it, even though he thought it wasn't as interesting as stun. In the end, that condition could forcibly reduce the target's motivation. Sang Yun then used his recovery skill and blocked the goblin lord's next attack. Even though the skill had limitations, he thought it might be useful against weaker monsters. He activated it again, wanting to test his luck, and the overload condition was removed thanks to recovery. With that, he struck the goblin lord with a light blow, then used his stun ability and finished the boss with several precise cuts. The delay effect was extended and the skill worked just as it should. After the battle, Sang Yun was covered in blood and visibly exhausted. The final boss had given him some trouble, but at least he leveled up and earned a rank D title called Don't Touch Me. He was so happy that he knelt down on the ground. The effect of the title allowed one of his skills to be strengthened, since the system would apply buffs accordingly. He felt like he was pushing himself too hard when first the bandits who followed him, then this dungeon, but even tired, he couldn't deny that the results were coming. The goddess of fortune thought it was incredible that he managed to accomplish all that and said she was happy to help such a lucky player. Deep down, however, she believed all the credit belonged to her. Sang Yun then increased his luck attribute, which now exceeded 100 points. This made him very happy, since every attribute that reached this number gained a 10% bonus. His artifact drop rate would now be even better, and since the final boss had dropped a shield called Kudna's Shield, which converted received damage into life regeneration, his luck would directly benefit him. In this case, the greater the luck, the higher the rank of the artifacts obtained. Sang Yun quickly synchronized his mana with the new shield, while being embraced by the goddess of fortune. He was beginning to think she was even more troublesome than the late model student. The scene then shifted to the mission station area near Jamsil Station, where Sang-yun received a huge no as a response. He didn't understand since he had his own ideas, but the association staff member said she was sorry, explaining that he had no idea how many bodies she had already seen that day. Sang-yun grew frustrated since he didn't want that to stop him. 2 days earlier, the scene showed him driving, worried about the goblin shield, thinking it was a bad meal. But it turned out to be just rice with kimchi, until several warnings appeared on the car's dashboard, startling him. For him, with so many problems, it seemed easier to buy a new car. He felt the urge to replace it and also wanted to move soon. Statistically, with his current level, there was a higher chance of becoming involved in crimes. For that reason, he thought it would be better to live in the player city, where surveillance was constant and where he could obtain all the artifacts he needed. He also considered buying secondhand equipment to make the process easier, but he knew he needed a lot of money for that. At that moment, there was only one place where he could get that amount of money. The system had been created along with the era of players, and with it came the missions, controlled by an organization called the Player Association. Within this system, he could make progress, so he decided to take on several missions. The scene shifted back to the present, where the clerk insisted he choose an appropriate dungeon, since he was trying to enter a level 100 dungeon without even having a ranking. He tried to convince her that he was reliable and wouldn't cause trouble, but she saw it as pure recklessness. He was only level 17 and wanted to enter a level 100 dungeon. In the end, the clerk made it clear that another player had once said the same things before begging not to die, urging him to just go to a lower level region. Sang-yun understood what she meant. After all, many people died by underestimating their own abilities. But Sang-yun still felt he needed to stand firm, so he refused to give up. Then a purple-haired girl approached, wanting to know what the problem was. The attendant who was speaking with Sang-yun tried to brush it off, saying it was nothing. However, that purple-haired girl was named Kim Miso. She was part of the Eden Guild and was already level 100, being an A+ rank player. Seeing her there surprised Sang-yun. He knew her. Kim Miso was famous as the Sharpshooter of Devastation, the first player to reach level 100 and earn the title of Sharpshooter. Despite her incredible skills, what stood out the most was the fact that she was the daughter of the president of the biotech company Shinsheng, Kim Yoon-cheol. For Sang-yun, that meant that Kim Miso, Shin-taeri, known as the Shadow Assassin for her title and reputation as the nation's greatest assassin, and Cho Jinho, one of the greatest swordsmen of the present, were all in the same guild, Eden. After all, Kim Miso was the daughter of the guild's biggest shareholder. She had been born into the greatest golden cradle in player history, and she had never seen Sang-yun before. Even so, she observed him from afar, wanting to know if he was really interested in starting a level 100 mission. Sang-yun explained that he needed money, while other players nearby were shocked to see Kim Miso talking to him. Many thought Sang-yun was insane for acting that way. In the end, Kim Miso made it clear that the mission site would be extremely challenging. But Sang-yun, even aware of that, was determined. He lived by 4 words as his motto: no risk, no reward. He wasn't acting that way because he hated Miso, even though she had rejected him when he once asked to join her group in his past life. He bore no grudge. Kim Miso asked if he knew that solo missions were forbidden at that level. And then Sang-yun realized that, during that time period, solo missions would only be allowed 4 years in the future. That made him laugh, and he pretended he had simply misread the notice, thanking her for the correction. But then Kim Miso proposed that he go with her, catching Sang-yun completely off guard. The players watching from a distance couldn't believe what they were hearing. Many felt jealous of him. In the end, Sang-yun wanted to know what the condition behind her offer was, and Miso explained that she only wanted to help a fellow player. Sang-yun said he had trouble trusting people, but Miso assured him there were no conditions. She only wanted one promise. If he disappointed her, he would have to pay for it. But if she was wrong, she herself would apologize. At that moment, Sang-yun understood everything. Miso wanted to test him. She wasn't just influential as a player. Everything she wore became a trend. Everything she said was published in dozens of articles. And if she saw too much confidence in a player, he could be certain that his career would be over. Even so, Sang-yun was willing and asked when they could go, since he found it all very interesting. The scene then rewound a bit, showing the moment when Miso had stepped out of a van. Most guild members were busy that day, and it seemed she would have to find other companions. That was when she overheard Sang-yun asking a woman to trust him. This sparked Miso's interest, since the rules required a minimum group size to attempt certain missions, and it was a convenient moment for her. In that instant, she saw a player overflowing with confidence, and not knowing how he would react made her interested in him. Back in the present, Miso asked which mission Sang-yun wanted to take. He quickly showed her. It was a defense mission where the objective was to eliminate all monsters before they reached the Guardian Tower. The reward was 500 million won. Miso found it odd that he hadn't chosen a collection or attack mission, but instead a defense mission. Due to the restrictions of that type of mission, it could only be cleared after defeating all the monsters, which was why a party of at least 4 players was recommended, especially especially with ranged damage. For Miso, attempting that alone was madness, practically asking to die. Sang-yun asked if she was scared. Miso realized he was a bit clueless, since he thought her silence meant fear. He even suggested they could wait for more people if she found it too difficult. That made her furious, so she grabbed him by the arm, but with a fake smile made it clear there was no problem at all, and accepted the mission. Thus, they were transported directly to the mission site. The woman working at the location was deeply worried, but hoped nothing bad would happen. The group of players who had witnessed the entire exchange weren't sure if they would succeed, but many trusted that Kim Miso must have had a plan. After all, she was an A+ ranked player. The association had recently created a new ranking system, since it was difficult to measure a player's strength solely by level. To earn a rank, two criteria had to be met: the number of dungeons cleared and the player's battle sense. Kim Miso had earned her A+ rank purely on her battle sense. She wasn't S rank, since that would mean no monster was stronger than her. Being A+ still indicated there were enemies beyond her capacity. The scene then shifted to the defense mission site, known as the Mission of Night and Wolves. Miso held her bow firmly, ready to take responsibility for her words. If Sang-yun got into danger, she would help him, but she hoped he would learn a lesson from all of this. At that moment, the story flashed back 30 minutes earlier, when Miso couldn't believe what she had just heard. Sang-yun had asked her not to get involved until he requested help, and if she limited herself to a support role, he promised to give her 5% of the reward. Miso was surprised, not by the terms, but by his attitude. Sang-yun explained that her support alone was worth the 5%, but she made it clear that it wasn't just about conditions. She thought it was impossible for him to endure that mission, since there would be at least 300 enemies. That mission was difficult even for her, despite being level 100. Yet Sang-yun, with his unshakable confidence, simply asked her to wait and watch. Miso then agreed, but proposed an addition. She wanted another 1% for every monster he let escape, stating that he would get nothing if 95 of them slipped through. At that moment, the first wolves began to approach. Sang-yun, already holding his longsword, declared that such a thing would never happen, even feeling sorry for Miso because he was about to wipe out all those wolves. The monsters charged at him, but he felt no fear. With overwhelming conviction, he began his assault, leaving Miso completely bewildered. Sang-yun cut down several wolves at once and walked calmly across the battlefield, finding it curious how the wolves sounded as they died. In that moment, Miso realized he wasn't just some arrogant player. His strikes were flawless, his stance revealed superior reach, and it reminded her of exactly what Jinho, the greatest warrior in her guild, used to embody: a perfect balance between offense and defense. Moreover, Sang-yun avoided unnecessary movements, finishing multiple enemies with each strike. Even so, she knew there was still a long way to go, since the number of enemies was overwhelming. These weren't monsters an average level 17 player could ever face. Then Miso noticed something strange from the start. All the monsters were stunned. She couldn't believe he had used such an ability. She lost her balance up high and nearly fell, while Sang-yun kept slicing wolves non-stop. She panicked, nearly meeting the other world. She wasn't certain, but she estimated the stun effect had lasted about 4 seconds, more than enough time for him to eliminate all the monsters. From that point on, she only wanted to know who this player really was. Sang-yun seemed to find it absurdly easy to defeat the enemies, but was soon caught off guard. An explosion erupted, and several wolves were blown into the air. Just as he expected, the black wolf had appeared, visibly enraged. Sang-yun had never fought the black wolf before, yet he felt a strange nostalgia. The monster unleashed a stun debuff, similar to the one Sang-yun himself used, and it also targeted Kim Miso. However, the effect didn't reach her, since she carried a special artifact that nullified stuns. At that moment, she remembered that the black wolf used this ability, and concluded Sang-yun was in danger. She thought it impossible for him to dispel the effect at his level. But then the system sent an alert. Due to recovery effects, the stun had been removed. Kim Miso witnessed all this unfold, and couldn't grasp how it was possible. Sang-yun's stance was nearly perfect, his stun incredibly long, and yet he could still remove debuffs. She simply couldn't believe he was truly a level 17 player. The black wolf now looked completely shocked. Sang-yun clearly saw the monster's surprise. It made perfect sense, since prey that should have been helpless under a stun had suddenly risen. Amid the chaos, Sang-yun believed that this brief moment of panic was exactly the chance he needed to finish the battle. Excited at the opportunity, he prepared to end the fight while the black wolf, in a last attempt, tried to slice him apart. It was as if the wolf lord had been stunned himself. In the end, Sang-yun's clothes were completely filthy, and he didn't like it one bit. But since he was dirty anyway, he decided it was time to have some fun. Far away on top of a building, Kim Miso smiled, trying to understand who on earth this guy was that she was on a mission with, because he was performing unbelievable feats for someone still at level 17. Sang-yun had already defeated 299 monsters, just one left. Even so, he leveled up multiple times and received the D-rank title called Fearless. This title granted immunity to negative effects caused by wolf-type monsters, except for bosses. Looking toward Kim Miso, he thought she was finally beginning to believe in his abilities, since earlier she had only looked at him with pure pure disdain. But his show wasn't over yet. He quickly stood up for the grand finale. A massive wolf emerged, and Sang-yun smiled at the sight of the beast, easily dodging its opening strike. That creature specialized in irregular attacks, but 30 years in the future, its patterns had already been completely deciphered. The protagonist struck the wolf with full force, already familiar with all its movements. However, the Wolf Lord's natural resistance prevented the activation of the demonic strike. That was the strength of a true level 100 boss. Mizo, watching it all, thought Sang-yun was completely insane. There was no way to sum up what she was seeing in just a few words. He not only freed himself from debuffs with ease, but also wielded a heavy sword as if it were light as a feather. The Wolf Lord tried to bite the swordsman, but Sang-yun dodged effortlessly. The battle grew fiercer, with multiple blocked strikes, and Miso couldn't help but notice that he knew the enemy's irregular patterns. Sang-yun had already fought this monster many times in his past life and knew all of its moves. What unsettled Miso the most was that, even if he was trying to prove his strength just to impress her, it only left her more frustrated for not understanding who he really was. The fight was already lasting longer than Sang-yun had predicted. His tricks to show off were exhausted, and he feared Miso might collapse from fatigue at any moment. He tried dodging the Wolf Lord's attacks while battling his own exhaustion, his HP dropping lower and lower. Then he recognized a pattern. The boss was using a powerful attack as bait, followed by a piercing strike. This was the Wolf Lord's legendary move, the same that had claimed countless players' lives. Sang-yun hadn't planned to use tricks, but in the face of desperation, he decided to bet everything, delivering a direct slash at the Wolf Lord, who retaliated instantly. Kim Miso, eyes wide open, watched everything. The Wolf Lord's strike had landed squarely on Sang-yun. Her eyes began to fill with tears and she felt like an idiot. She believed she didn't deserve the title of player. Even though Sang-yun had performed incredible feats, she had let her guard down and allowed that to happen. All she wanted in that moment was to be forgiven by him. But then, an intense light appeared. The Shield of Kudness was reduced to ashes and disappeared forever, activating the special effect called Sacrifice, a conditional healing ability in which the user had to choose a part of the body to take the full impact of the strike, converting all the damage received into HP recovery. Although he found this power highly specific, Sang-yun chose the front of his body, and thus his health bar was completely restored. His trick had worked, but if it hadn't, he would have died instantly. Without wasting time, he activated the demonic strike once again, still unsure if it was luck or misfortune. In the end, he managed to cut off the Wolf Lord's right arm and wanted to see if his stun ability would bypass the final boss's resistance. After testing, he realized the effect worked 3 times, which he considered more than enough. It was then that Kim Miso began to approach Sang-yun after the battle ended. Kim Miso came closer, showing concern. She wanted to know why Sang-yun hadn't warned her beforehand that he had a healing ability, since for a moment she had thought he had died. The scare had been too much, and now she was confused. She wanted to understand if this was truly his first life, or if somehow Sang-yun had already gone through all of that before. The way he knew every pattern of the Wolf Lord made it seem as if he had lived that battle many times. She had met many players throughout her career, of all types and levels, but he was the first who managed to leave her completely speechless. It was hard to understand who he really was, and the strangest part was that he didn't seem to care what others thought. Sang-yun, seeing Miso's reaction, simply smiled, curious about what else she was thinking, wanting to hear more, perhaps expecting a bit of recognition, or simply enjoying the unexpected situation. Soon, Kim Miso feels a strange pressure in the air and comments that it was as if she were facing a rancor. This leaves Sang-yun a bit disappointed, as he had hoped she would say it felt like he had regressed. But he realizes that an average player would hardly reach such a conclusion. For a moment, he thought she might have a sudden vision, like some fortune teller. However, the Wolf Lord had not been completely defeated yet, so Kim Miso asks if he wasn't going to finish the job. Sang-yun had actually forgotten to finish off the monster due to everything that had just happened. But upon fully defeating it, he receives a C-rank title that activates whenever the enemy is isolated, increasing all his attributes by 20%. He's happy to know that his first C-rank title was geared towards solo combat. Seeing this, Kim Miso shows interest, and the swordsman asks if she had ever completed that stage alone. She tries to pretend yes, but ends up admitting that she only managed it thanks to a very powerful artifact. Even so, Sang-yun, always humble, believes that just the fact she completed the mission already shows talent, even if using an expensive item. The problem was that her artifact had cost over 200 billion won, which basically placed her in the pay-to-win category. Comparing her to Sang-yun, who only used a regular sword, showed the massive difference between the two. Even so, he thinks about testing the effects of his new title. He even activates it, but decides to leave that for later. Kim Miso says she has to leave and calls her porters to assist her. He just thanks her for the help, knowing that without her, he wouldn't have even had the chance to enter that mission. Sang-yun believes that, since he did most of the work, he made a good impression on her. Suddenly, she says she's giving up her share of the reward, something that surprises him, as he finds it unfair. But for Kim Miso, who is absurdly rich, it didn't matter. She says they would have more chances to work together, and that he should see it as an investment. Sang-yun concludes that he can't let his guard down around her. With everything settled, he finally checks his reward, the Blue Moonstone, a precious item imbued with the faith of the Silver Clan that worshipped the Blue Moon. He starts trembling with joy because the artifact was platinum ranked. Despite looking like a mere trinket, like some cheap gypsy ornament, the stone was easily worth $1 billion, enough to buy an apartment in Seoul, a dream for any working-class person to escape rent. The goddess of luck wanted to know if he believed in her now. After all, he had the feeling that he had just hit the jackpot in life. This confused Sang-yun, as he believed he had gotten this far through his own effort. He had invested many attribute points in luck, and now his constellation seemed to want to invalidate his entire journey. Suddenly, a constellation called He Who Had His Lips Torn Off raises objections, saying Sang-yun's luck was unfair, and the system proposes banning the goddess of luck. However, the goddess herself asks the other constellations to vote. The result is that He Who Had His Lips Torn Off ends up being banned from the system and loses the right to operate as a constellation. Sang-yun can't believe what he just saw. The popularity of the goddess really made everything go her way. Decided, he chooses to absorb 40% of the artifact's attributes, especially interested in the effect that left wolves and dogs permanently stunned, which made him invincible against that kind of enemy during the full moon. Without wasting time, he starts mana synchronization. The scene shifts suddenly to the mission hall lobby. Sang-yun is caught off guard when he sees a crowd outside waiting for him. Everyone wanted to know who had soloed a level 100 dungeon. Some people doubted it was really Shin Sang-yun, but also found it hard to believe that Kim Miso would lie. At that moment, the girl appears and asks everyone to remain calm. The association staff member was quite worried since it was her job to maintain order, and the information that a level 17 player had entered such a high-level mission was very delicate. Kim Miso tries to control the situation with the public, explaining that she tried to stop him along with other staff, but believes everyone should see Shin Sang-yun up close. In the end, he almost forgets about the staff member, which makes him feel bad for her. Then the recruitment leader of the Guardian Guild shows up. He introduces himself as Yoon Ju-han and makes it clear that he wants to recruit him. But he wasn't the only one. There were several others trying to do the same. Kim Miso immediately interferes, saying Sang-yun still had unfinished business with her, looking at him with a smile to confirm her claim. Sang-yun decides to play along, even though he had no idea what her plan was. After all, she had just saved him from a tight spot. But what he didn't know was that Kim Miso was, at that moment, deeply interested in him after everything she had seen. The scene then shifts to a limousine driving along the road while Sang-yun walked inside it. Beside him was Kim Miso. He was looking at his bank account balance with a smile on his face. So many digits, enough to make any regressor swordsman extremely happy. The reward had arrived surprisingly fast. He hadn't expected the payment to come through so soon. Miso then explains that it was only possible thanks to her A-rank porters and her personal influence, which accelerated the process. Sang-yun felt grateful that she had taken care of everything. But suddenly Miso switched to her secret mode, which made the swordsman suspicious. He already knew that no good deed came without some sort of hidden intention. And soon enough, Miso got straight to the point, inviting him to join the Eden Guild. He thought she was being a little overconfident, but she insisted there was a meaning behind the guild's name. However, Sang-yun had already anticipated this situation. Before returning in time, he had been just another member of a small guild, and even though he had no talent back then, it gave him a sense of belonging. Everything felt honest and peaceful. But unfortunately, an incident destroyed that reality. And now he knew that even with good infrastructure, at the current pace of growth, joining a guild would be like putting shackles on his own wrists. For now, the best choice was to continue alone. He knew being part of a group would limit his potential. Just as he was about to politely refuse the offer, Miso surprised him by asking if he planned to start a one-man guild, leaving him a little embarrassed. He realized just how sharp and intelligent she was. She then revealed that she was the daughter of the CEO of a major corporation, and that, considering his abilities, it wasn't a hard deduction. What mattered was that he was the only one who knew this now, leaving him completely stunned. Even knowing he would probably say no, she was transparent. She laid all her cards on the table, showed genuine interest, and made a proposal of mutual benefit. Sang-yun concluded she was a top-level negotiator. The scene then changes to the C-rank player city, near Jamsil Station, where a woman was signing a contract with Sang-yun. She was talking about absurdly high amounts, which scared the swordsman. After that, she left, and he was shocked at how fast everything had happened, even thinking it might also be the work of the goddess of luck. He then loses himself, staring out the window, reflecting on how much had happened happened in such a short time, his sudden regression, the constant confusion, and the endless situations that kept coming up. He had spent days trying to understand what was going on without finding answers. And even so, he still didn't know what to do until his mindset completely changed. A feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time returned, the rush of blood pumping through his veins. Even though he hadn't achieved anything yet, it felt like youth was in his hands again, and it refused to let him stay idle. That's why he swore to himself that this time his life would be completely different. It wouldn't be pathetic like before. And because of that, he carried a trauma that kept him from accepting anything that reminded him of the failure in his past life. Opportunities were now coming one after another. The scene then shifts to Kim Miso, who was on the phone with reporter Park Jong-min, a journalist known for being incredibly fast with news. Sang-yeon watches from a distance, surprised to see her talking to a Player Gazette reporter, since Park Jong-min was considered an S-ranked journalist. The reporter had heard rumors that Sang-yeon was in the same area as Miso, and wherever he went, crowds gathered trying to find out who the famous Shin Sang-yeon was. Suddenly, he had become the talk of the town. Miso confirms the rumors were true, but the reporter asks her to get to the point. Soon after, Sang-yeon steps out of the car, thanking her for the ride. But before he walks away, Miso tells him she's planning to explore an unknown portal soon. It will be a free team composed of 4 players, aimed at those level 120 or higher. And Sang-yeon gets excited upon hearing that. It was almost comical. Sang-yeon had coldly rejected Miso's guild offer, but with a simple invitation to an unknown portal, he lit up with excitement. It was something he had longed for. After all, dungeons were fixed locations with static entrances and exits, predictable monsters and traps. But portals were dynamic, constantly shifting environments, locations, and enemies. The risk was higher, but so was the reward. That was the core principle of the player's world. Additionally, unknown portals offered first exploration bonuses, with the possibility of acquiring high-level artifacts. Sang-yeon believed Miso already had experience with this type of mission. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for her to obtain an artifact that ignored the Black Wolf's debuff. In the end, Miso promised she would contact him as soon as she knew more details. She asked for his phone number, but instead handed over her locked phone, only realizing the mistake afterward and apologizing, saying her head was a mess. Sang-yeon fell silent, noticing there was something different about Miso, but he knew all players carried burdens. Despite her mysterious past, he could never reveal to anyone that he had regressed. The very idea of being discovered made him extremely anxious, since he had no idea what might happen if the truth ever came out. Sang-yeon was also curious about how the late model student was doing. After all, they had been together for years, and he just wanted to see his face one more time. The scene shifts to the VIP room of the Eden Guild, where a young man was thinking it had been a while since their last conversation, and figured he could have some coffee and chat with Kim Miso. But she was completely focused on her phone. At that moment, she was exchanging messages with Sang-yeon, as the two were preparing to explore a portal together. The young man believed Miso was interested in Sang-yeon, but she made it clear that wasn't the case. He had a skill called Stun, and he knew Sang-yeon's ability was even crazier. He also knew Sang-yeon had rejected the invitation to join the guild, which irritated Miso, who told him to worry more about his own problems. She also commented that Sang-yeon's swordsmanship was very impressive, but the young man thought she was exaggerating. In the end, the guy, named Jo Jinho, a level 700 player from the Eden Guild, thought it was absurd to compare someone like himself to Sang-yeon. The scene shifts again to the Jamsil training field, where Sang-yeon thanked Miso for calling. She wanted to talk about a new portal that had appeared recently. He had plenty of time to listen. The unknown portal was located near Chuni Station on Line 7. All the areas up to the midpoint checkpoint had already been investigated, and Miso even sent him the internal session data for analysis, which surprised the swordsman. The intermediate boss of the portal was Cerberus, the Hellhound, which got Sang-yeon excited. He had just acquired a new skill and hadn't expected to use it so soon. He was grateful that Miso had given him the heads up. At that moment, Yoon Dae-kyung was beside him and joked about Sang-yeon taking a call and then being glued to his phone. To him, Sang-yeon was practically a celebrity now, and it made sense that he was always busy. Sang-yeon clarified that he was no celebrity, but his reaction made Dae-kyung think he had no idea. So, he showed him his smartphone screen and revealed that Sang-yeon was on the front page of the Player Gazette. The swordsman panicked upon seeing it. He didn't want to be in the news, especially not without warning. He quickly grabbed his own phone, while Dae-kyung mentioned that everyone who knew him had been trying to reach him. Still, Sang-yeon couldn't believe things had escalated this far. Dae-kyung didn't waste any time and showed him a bag, which made Sang-yeon extremely happy and thankful. But Dae-kyung didn't understand why he was so grateful. After all, nothing was free. The bag was full of old artifacts that Dae-kyung no longer used. He didn't see why the swordsman would want them, thinking it would be easier to just buy new ones. Sang-yeon replied that he wanted to honor the legacy or perhaps carry on Dae-kyung's history, which made things even weirder. So he tried to cover it up by saying it was a superstition. He couldn't reveal that old, unused artifacts had a higher absorption rate. Suddenly, a young woman appears and apologizes for being late, explaining she had trouble finding a parking spot. She wanted to begin the appraisal as soon as possible. Dae-kyung explained that she was an evaluator he had brought to ensure the deal between them was fair. She used her skill to conduct the appraisal and confirmed that everything was in order for the deal to proceed. But before wrapping up, Dae-kyung asked Sang-yun to watch his swordsmanship. Sang-yun didn't feel comfortable giving advice, but Dae-kyung insisted, saying he should stop pretending to be humble because they both knew Sang-yun was much better and that he wanted to hear advice from someone superior. Sang-yun didn't like the situation and didn't want to get involved, but he could see how nervous and anxious Dae-kyung was as he waited for a response. He couldn't simply ignore someone who was trying their best. That would be incredibly rude. So, Sang-yun asked Dae-kyung to pretend he wasn't there and show everything he could do. He also asked the evaluator to stand behind him for safety. Dae-kyung took a deep breath and began demonstrating all his moves and techniques, marking a new phase in that reunion. Sang-yun was surprised to see how much Yoon Dae-kyung had improved since their last dungeon, indicating he'd been training hard ever since. However, something caught Sang-yun's attention, and he immediately called out to Dae-kyung, leaving him confused since he still wanted to show more. The protagonist asked if there was something wrong with Dae-kyung's left arm, which took him completely by surprise. He wanted to know how Sang-yun had figured it out. The answer lay in the small details. Dae-kyung always attacked with his right hand and flexed his left shoulder too quickly, as if being extra careful. Dae-kyung explained that he had a trauma with his left side. Most of his injuries during training in dungeons had occurred on that side, and even though he was aware of the problem, he couldn't fix it. Sang-yun replied that he absolutely could overcome the trauma, because no weakness needed to be hidden, and he should find a way to accept his own strength. The protagonist explained that based on how he held his sword and even how he breathed, it was clear it wouldn't be easy to change everything at once, but over time the results would improve. He even demonstrated a technique, showing that applying more pressure with the finger on the sword would help. Dae-kyung said it hurt to do it that way, and a girl who was watching became visibly embarrassed by their comments, thinking it might be something else. She couldn't understand what their problem was, since Sang-yun was so close to the vain Dae-kyung, and the conservative evaluator just wanted to understand what kind of scene she was witnessing. Dae-kyung, the pretty boy, even started sweating, and later, when she got home, the evaluator's browser history showed she had enjoyed what she saw. The scene then showed the protagonist's completely destroyed car, which she still believed had been a good deal, even though it cost over 400 million won, because the benefits he'd gain would make up for the price. Although Dae-kyung seemed satisfied with the swordsmanship lesson, the evaluator still had a strange look on her face by the end of it. Sang-yun just wanted to devour the artifacts to see how much he would evolve, and couldn't wait for the next gate to appear, but was surprised by a few guys standing right in front of his car. He swerved and apologized when a fat man realized that Sang-yun had finally arrived. The man approached quickly, clearly tired of waiting, and demanded that Sang-yun get out of the car without explaining why. The protagonist was confused, not understanding anything. The fat man wasn't alone. There was also a blonde guy with him. And suddenly, the fat one gathered energy with the intent to kill Sang-yun. That's when the swordsman remembered who they were. Those guys were Choi Young-cheol and Cho Seong-ho, members of the Utopia Guild. Choi Young-cheol used to only attack those weaker than him, while Cho Seong-ho was his lackey, responsible for recording his videos. Due to the extreme content, Young-cheol had gained a few loyal subscribers, but after crossing too many lines, he was sentenced to life in prison and faded into obscurity. Seong-ho called out to his partner when he noticed Sang-yun wasn't even moving. In short, those two wannabe YouTubers were the trash of humanity. Young-cheol thought Sang-yun was trying to provoke him, but in reality, the protagonist was simply imagining his progress with the new artifacts. Still, he didn't want to test his abilities on that kind of opponent, so he got out of the car and asked what exactly was going on. Young-cheol replied that there was no rush, and suggested that Sang-yun calm down, saying he was the area's security guard and had received complaints about a loser wandering around with a ridiculous car. People were mad just from seeing Sang-yun's car, and Young-cheol kicked it, denting it completely and leaving the protagonist shocked. Young-cheol threatened him, saying that if he didn't leave, he'd lose the car. Some passersby started watching the scene, recognizing Sang-yun. After all, he had appeared in the Player's Gazette. Hearing the crowd's comments, Young-cheol began to question whether Sang-yun was actually strong, and Seong-ho reminded him that he had been seen entering a mission area with Kim Mi-so, and there were rumors that he had cleared a level 100 mission alone. Young-cheol found it hard to believe, judging Sang-yun as weak, but Seong-ho disagreed, saying Kim Mi-so would never hang around someone weak, and he was already thinking of a title for their next video. They didn't believe in Sang-yun's skills, and the title would be something like Teaching Kim Mi-so's Rookie a Lesson. Seong-ho began recording, and Young-cheol proposed a duel in training mode. If Young-cheol won, Sang-yun would have to leave Player City immediately, but if Sang-yun won, they'd have to disappear from his sight forever. The protagonist accepted without hesitation, but added that he also wanted 500 million won and the watch on Young-cheol's wrist. If the fat guy got scared, he could just run. Sang-yun's fury was already obvious. Seong-ho then pulled Yong-chul aside to show him something. The livestream chat was full of people encouraging the fight, and Sang-yun just wanted to know if Yong-chul would chicken out. Yong-chul grew worried because at the rate things were going, the video might be demonetized due to violence and adult content. Meanwhile, Sang-yun saw it as a great opportunity to relieve some stress. The scene then shifted to Player City at Building C's Plaza, where some people were watching everything without fully understanding what was happening. The training mode between Yong-chul and Sang-yun had been activated, and both players received the barrier effect. Yong-chul accepted the protagonist's proposal, promising he would keep his word, but still thought it would be better if Sang-yun gave up while he could. He was far too arrogant to imagine how skilled Sang-yun actually was. Now that the training mode had been fully activated, the fight could begin, and Sang-yun took a deep breath. Yong-chul warned that he didn't like games, but before he could do anything, Seong-ho called his attention. At that moment, Sang-yun had already jumped and was about to strike him, making it clear he wasn't there to play either, and that he wouldn't show mercy even if Yong-chul begged. Kim Miso, watching the live stream, was shocked and extremely worried because she recognized Yong-chul. She knew he was part of the Utopia Guild, a B-rank player who did whatever he wanted because he was the nephew of the guildmaster. That's when Shin Tae-ri arrived, noticing Miso's expression and asking what had happened. Shin Tae-ri was a high-level S-rank player and also a member of Guild Eden. When she looked at the screen, she recognized Sang-yun. After all, she knew he was the guy Kim Miso had been trying to recruit. Miso explained that she was trying to figure out why Sang-yun was on a live stream with that idiot, and Terry was surprised by his movements, thinking they were quite good. Meanwhile, Yong-chul, completely furious, accused the protagonist of being a damn cheater. He tried to use his magic and hit him, but Sang-yun with his sword precisely defended himself, cutting the spell in half. Seong-ho, terrified, wanted to know who the hell that guy was, and everyone in the chat also wanted to understand how Sang-yun had pulled off that move. For the first time since his regression, Sang-yun's body was moving exactly the way he wanted. The scene then suddenly shifted to 3 hours earlier, when Sang-yun was with Dae-kyung and the evaluator. He thanked the woman, because thanks to her, the deal was finalized quickly. Although from her perspective, it was the two men who had done all the work. Dae-kyung even invited them for drinks, promising to pay for everything. But Sang-yun declined, saying he had to go. Dae-kyung was disappointed until the evaluator made an excuse to leave with him alone. Sang-yun wasn't interested in drinks. He just wanted to focus on his progress. After the negotiation, he left a place with a briefcase when the system notified him that the artifact's usage time would increase the absorption rate and that the final rate would be 90%. Sang-yun was extremely surprised, but the goddess of luck stated that it was only thanks to her that he had such blessings. Sang-yun knew that normally he would only be able to absorb 1/10 of an item's original stats, so this difference was enormous. He asked the goddess of luck if she was a popular constellation and wanted to know if she had heard of one called the Late Honor Student. The goddess of luck became irritated, saying he should focus only on her, clearly jealous. Sang-yun explained it wasn't anything serious. He just felt that constellation was important to him. In the end, the goddess of luck decided to look into the mysterious constellation, which made the protagonist quite happy. Soon after, he decided to enjoy a meal, and this time, he received the 5 favorite dishes of men. Even though the artifacts had belonged to an older man, the food still looked appetizing even for someone younger. All the artifacts had a 90% absorption rate, and Sang-yun had no idea how strong he would become after consuming them. The scene returned to the battle with Yong-chul, and the confrontation title had been activated. Sang-yun found the effects disappointing, while Yong-chul started to tremble. The chat in the live stream showed no mercy, mocking the situation. Yong-chul tried again to strike the swordsman, and Kim Miso grew increasingly concerned, but Terry assured her there was no need to worry. Sang-yun would dodge. Fearlessly, Sang-yun charged toward the fat man, mentally reminding him about the 500 million won and the wristwatch. He found an opening, and just as he was about to strike, Yong-chul grinned with a psychotic smile, making it clear he thought the victory was already his. Yong-chul used a skill called Forced Freezing, and Sang-yun was frozen in place, completely surprised by the magic. Terry was confused. She didn't know Yong-chul could use any magic besides his known pyromancy. Kim Miso started laughing, asking Shin Tae-ri to listen closely to what she had to say. She explained that Sang-yun was a player with the rare ability to remove negative statuses, and that was why she wanted Terry to see firsthand the real reason she had been trying to recruit him into their organization. It was then that she looked at the television screen and noticed that Sang-yun had simply vanished from the scene. Yong-chul was confused, trying to understand where he had gone, even though he was sure the skill had been correctly activated. Because of this, he started to believe that Sang-yun really did possess a negative status removal skill, which led him to question whether this guy was actually a rookie. Suddenly, with a leap, Sang-yun appeared behind Yang Cheol, but not in the way someone with ill intentions might imagine. He slammed the YouTuber hard to the ground and was about to stab him with his sword, but the training mode saved his opponent, preventing any fatal blow. This mode minimized all potentially lethal damage. The viewers in the livestream chat noticed that something had changed in Sang-yun, and Xiangho realized he was now emitting an entirely different aura from before. Without understanding what the protagonist had done, Terry observed that it seemed to be an awakening skill. She thought it could be something like transcendence or maybe even psychedelic, but after seeing the color of the swordsman's eyes, she became more convinced it was psychedelic. This type of ability causes extreme fatigue whenever the user takes damage. Kim Miso felt a bit uneasy upon hearing that, since Sang-yun had never used anything like that around her. Terry considered two possibilities. Either he had no reason to use the skill in her presence, or he had a method to acquire rare skills like that in a short amount of time. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the evaluator, who was analyzing the artifacts and believed the situation was concerning. The artifact that Shin Sang-yun had purchased needed to be tested more carefully, as it had a hidden ability called psychedelic. The evaluator suspected that for him to be lucky enough to obtain something with such a low activation chance, Sang-yun had probably chosen the goddess of luck as his constellation. The psychedelic ability was dangerous. When activated, it put the user into an awakened state for 100 seconds, making all their physical and mental abilities surpass their own limits. However, after the effect wore off, a 10-minute period of extreme fatigue would set in, and that side effect could not be avoided. But Sang-yun was only thinking about the bet he had made with Yang Cheol, who was now terrified on the ground. The protagonist wanted to exit training mode so he could finish him off for real. Yang Cheol deeply regretted underestimating his opponent, thinking he was just a rookie. Now, he knew he had to fight seriously, so he created some distance between them. Everything was completely different from what Xiangho had told him, and he would never have started that fight if he'd known Sang-yun's true strength. Yang Cheol began to suspect that Xiangho had made the whole thing up. However, Sang-yun quickly closed the distance, determined to end the fight. He wanted a grand finale and smashed his opponent's head into the ground without hesitation, knowing training mode would prevent any fatal damage. Yang Cheol, already defeated, asked him to stop and admitted that Sang-yun had won, promising to transfer the 500 million won to his account. But Sang-yun didn't care about the money. Now that the bet was over, he was only thinking about revenge. Yang Cheol, confused, couldn't understand why the swordsman wanted to get back at him. But it had all started because of Yang Cheol, exactly 13 days earlier, at the dealership where the mechanics had fixed Sang-yun's car. They told him he needed to replace the vehicle soon because it was too old and wouldn't last much longer, which left Sang-yun quite shocked. He even cried, as he had a strong emotional attachment to the car. This was all a personal vendetta because he truly valued that vehicle. Yang Cheol became desperate and started begging Sang-yun for forgiveness, crying like a child. Everyone was shocked to see the YouTuber, who had acted so tough, now in tears. To make things worse, he had pooped his pants, and the chat couldn't believe he had been completely mogged, showing total beta energy. Some people didn't even notice what had happened until the smell started spreading. The stench was so strong that everyone assumed he had eaten something extremely greasy. Xiangho was panicking, unsure of what they were supposed to do next. He didn't care about the YouTube channel anymore and realized they had messed with the wrong person. Suddenly, the manager of the Utopia Guild appeared to check out the commotion. His name was Moon Baekyun. Xiangho tried to apologize, but Baekyun found the situation very intriguing. He had heard that Sang-yun had recently awakened and yet still managed to defeat Yang Cheol, so he approached the swordsman to try and clear up the misunderstanding. The problem was that Sang-yun had no idea who he was and asked for his name and which organization he belonged to. The Utopia Guild manager was initially annoyed, thinking Sang-yun was being arrogant, but soon realized it was just confidence. Sang-yun's skills and experience didn't match his current level. Because of that, Baekyun properly introduced himself, bowed, and apologized for his earlier approach. He just wanted to recruit Sang-yun and promised that the Utopia Guild would cover any damages caused. It was all just a way to maintain good relations with the protagonist. But Sang-yun figured 2 billion won would settle everything, and even showed his bank account so the manager could make the transfer. Baekyun wanted to know if he could pay in installments, while Yang Cheol remained lying on the ground. Right after that, Sang-yun was swarmed by reporters who bombarded him with questions. He just wanted some peace and made it clear he had nothing to say, asking everyone to leave. However, the reporters insisted that he tell the truth. They even wanted to know if he was in a relationship with Kim Miso, which made Sang-yun even more stressed. He already had too many problems to deal with and believed that dating would only be a distraction. He was an alpha and wanted to stay focused, and so he began packing his things, still in disbelief that the day of the expedition mentioned by Kim Miso had finally arrived. Because of that, he had been busy the entire week, but now he felt more confident. His demonic strike had leveled up and would now last longer. He also took a look at his other abilities and believed they would be enough for the mission he'd undertake with Kim Miso and her companions. Even so, he knew a lot was still missing. In the last battle, he he couldn't fight the way he used to. During the fight against the Wolf Lord, he had to go all in as his combat patterns were too limited. In the battle against Yang Cheol, he had been easily caught because he had no movement skills. If Yang Cheol had been stronger, Sang Yun would have died if the training mode hadn't been activated. Sang Yun felt he needed to focus. If he kept going like this, all his progress would be in vain. He'd just end up repeating the same mistakes from his past life. In this second chance, he wanted to grow as much as possible. He clearly remembered that the second invasion in 2040 would be extremely difficult. He needed to make sure the future would be different, and he didn't want to lose everything again. That's why he decided he would become stronger at all costs, just like the man who had once saved him. Suddenly, his phone started ringing. It was reporter Jung Min, calling to remind him about the interview scheduled for that very day. Sang Yun's eyes widened. He had completely forgotten. The problem was that the portal expedition was set to begin at 7 p.m. If the interview were at 2 p.m., it would still work, but it was already 1:45 p.m. He rushed out, almost flying to the location. The people in the apartment complex thought he was coming to greet them and were happy to see him, but Sang Yun had a completely different aura about him. He wished everyone would get out of the way. His skill called psychedelic was activated, and his presence had become overwhelming and undeniable. He finally arrived at the location where reporter Jung Min was waiting. The man smiled upon seeing him and said he had already ordered some coffee, inviting Sang Yun to sit down. Observing the aura around the swordsman, Jung Min thought he looked quite impressive. Sang Yun thanked him politely, still catching his breath from rushing over. The reporter grew curious, asking if he had just come from a dungeon, but for Sang Yun, just getting there had been harder than that, and he apologized for the delay. Jung Min didn't mind. What mattered to him was that the interview could happen. He explained that he wanted to talk about the recent events in the mission area, since Sang Yun had become the center of attention among players. It was common to say that levels and experience no longer meant anything under the new ranking system, but the truth was that everyone saw Sang Yun as a super rookie. The reporter knew that many guilds were trying to recruit him. Sang Yun confirmed that he had received a lot of calls, assuming the reporter meant Guild Eden and other Korean guilds, but Jungmin was referring to foreign guilds. That surprised Sang Yun, and it was also new information for the reporter himself. He explained that 5 foreign guilds had submitted an official request to the Korean Players Association that morning, asking to verify the swordsman's identity. Foreign guilds are known for recruiting players still in their early stages to gain an edge in the future. This might have been the first time they showed so much interest in someone like Sang Yun, but he couldn't let his guard down, as everyone was watching. The scene then shifted to Chunui Station, in the back alleys, where a portal had appeared. Sang Yun wasn't too pleased with it. He dreamed of creating a one-man guild. He wondered if these foreign guilds were on a completely different level, and remembered how much he had suffered in the past. It was hard to believe all of this was now happening to him. Then Kim Miso found him and called out, saying they still had time before the gate opened. Beside her was a woman whom Sang Yun immediately recognized. Miso explained that she wanted to meet him before they entered the portal, and revealed her name was Shin Terry, also a member of Guild Eden. Miso suggested they all head to a cafe, while Terry held Sang Yun's hand, and he introduced himself as well. Even without the introduction, he would have recognized her anywhere. There wasn't a player in the country who didn't know Shin Terry, also known as the Shadow Assassin, one of Korea's top players. Her fame even crossed borders. She was one of the reasons for Guild Eden's current influence, and her very presence could shift guild rankings. Sang Yun believed he had been lucky to meet rankers ever since coming back in time. Terry said she wanted to ask him for a favor, which sounded strange since it came out of nowhere. She assured him it was nothing serious. She just wanted to fight him. Miso found it odd, especially coming from someone who had just met the swordsman. Terry was confused, thinking she had already explained it on the way. In fact, Miso had only told him why she wanted to recruit Sang Yun, while Terry wanted to know if he was worthy, which wasn't quite the same thing. Miso apologized, trying to justify herself with a flimsy excuse, but Sang Yun didn't care and wanted to get straight to the point, already pulling out his longsword. To him, fighting one of the top national players was an honor. Opportunities like this didn't come every day. Terry noticed that Miso really had an eye for talent, but still apologized for the lack of professionalism. She suggested they exchange just 5 strikes and told him to say when he was ready. Sang Yun knew he was no match for Terry, but he wanted to take the opportunity to gauge how much he had grown and what still needed improvement. Terry summoned her weapon, and in that moment, her aura completely changed. Sang Yun realized he couldn't waste any time and reactivated his psychedelic skill, saying he was ready. He wanted to go all out from the very beginning. Miso was confused, not understanding what was happening. She couldn't keep up with their level. Terry then took the first step and vanished suddenly. That made Sang Yun anxious. He felt like an idiot, because with his current physical capabilities, he couldn't rely on reaction time. To fight her, he would have to predict her movements in advance. Even so, he managed to block the attack just in time, which which surprised Terry. She hadn't expected him to keep up with her move. Terry praised Sang-yoon's movement, warning him that she would try a bit harder now since she still had 4 strikes left. Sang-yoon quickly realized she was a monster, and what's more, she was getting faster. Just like he'd done once before, he decided to completely ignore his vision and tried to read her movements by instinct. Even though it would be much harder this time, he closed his eyes, which left Miso completely shocked, as he was doing this despite the massive gap between them. She thought it was a stupid decision. Even with his eyes closed, Sang-yoon felt Terry's attack coming and managed to dodge in time. Terry was impressed with his focus, thinking he wouldn't be able to block the second strike. Most swordsmen couldn't reach that level of concentration. It required a lot of experience. To her, it felt like she was fighting a veteran. 3 strikes remained, but Sang-yoon asked for a favor. He wanted her to forget the remaining strikes and go all in with just one final blow. She was surprised by the request, but Sang-yoon knew he was being arrogant. Still, he felt that he might never get another chance like this again, and wanted to see for himself what she was truly capable of. If he didn't witness it with his own eyes, it would haunt him during training. Miso tried to stop Terry from agreeing, but she didn't see a problem with it. Even without using 100% of her power, Terry promised to show Sang-yoon her maximum speed. For him, it would be a success if he could simply keep up. He just had to treat it like a real battle, and he knew that if he slipped up, he could die. Terry dashed in with everything she had, and he barely had time to react. He understood he needed to be ready before the attack even began. Instead of simply swinging his sword, he attacked the space ahead of her arrival, which caught her off guard. However, Terry's shadow illusion skill activated, and she reappeared behind him, striking him in the face. Even so, she was concerned and asked if he was okay. Sang-yoon only felt a headache. Terry reached out to help him up and apologized for using a skill on him. He thanked her, saying he was happy that she had taken the fight seriously. Terry found that amusing and said that next time she wanted to have a real conversation with him, promising to call later. Miso watched everything in silence, feeling a hint of jealousy. With a slightly psychotic tone, she interrupted and reminded them that the exploration was about to begin, suggesting that Terry write up a report about what had happened. Terry apologized and said goodbye. Whether he liked it or not, that was the first time Sang-yoon had lost since he came back in time, and he knew that if Shin Terry had gone all out from the beginning, he wouldn't have stood a chance. Despite being an unexpected encounter, he now had a new goal to strive for. He felt like he could keep trying for as long as it took. Then the scene shifted to Chunui Station, where an unidentified portal marked with the number 727 had appeared. Miso was excited and thought they should start introductions. Sang-yoon introduced himself to the others, who were curious to meet the guy who had appeared in the Player Gazette. Among them was a mage named Park Tae-sok, a player specialized in the Ignition skill, with rank A and level 120. Ignition was similar to the pyromancy that Yang Cheol had used against Sang-yoon, but Park Tae-sok was completely different. He spent most of his time conjuring flames, and his were far more powerful. Even so, he was still only at the blue flame stage. Sang-yoon could tell how confident the guy was. In his view, Tae-sok had made the right decision. Reaching a high level by focusing on a single skill was the best path. Yang Cheol's problem was that, instead of specializing in one area, he wasted time learning various different skills, which made it easier to defeat him. The girl was Kang Joo-hee, a spatial wielder specialized in dimensional connection abilities. She was shy, at level 110 and ranked A. Joo-hee wanted to show off her powers after Tae-seok had shown his, but it wasn't simple and ended up generating a powerful gust of wind ahead of them, something unexpected even for a spatial wielder. Sang-yoon was surprised by the display and watched as Joo-hee bowed before him, making it clear it was a pleasure to meet him. Deep down, Sang-yoon knew he could trust her, believing she was the final piece to form a perfect team. He was the close-range swordsman. Kim Miso handled long-range attacks, Tae-seok filled in the gaps during battle, and Joo-hee could ensure an escape if necessary. Even without a healer, that group already felt perfect to him. Their chemistry was natural, as if it weren't their first time working together, and he understood how important that was when survival was at stake. He even reflected on how, in the past, he'd had companions he got along with just as well. But his thoughts were interrupted when Kim Miso approached. She wanted to know if he was okay or if he had been hurt during the fight against Harry. But Sang-yoon said everything was fine. He was just lost in thought. He decided to worry about that later. Now he wanted to focus 100% on the present. Feeling excited, he awaited entry into the portal, which turned out to be a frozen hell. The 4 of them walked together, and Sang-yoon thanked Tae-seok for the buff. Without the blessing of flames that granted resistance to cold, they'd have become popsicles already. Miso noticed that Sang-yoon was carrying another weapon besides his sword and asked why he hadn't used it earlier. He explained that he had the impression he'd needed in battles requiring more mobility, but it was a new weapon he had only recently acquired. Miso already suspected he was skilled with different types of weapons, and the swordsman got flustered, barely able to make up an excuse. Soon after, Kim Miso called out to Joo-hee, reminding her of Plan C as a colossal monster had appeared. Johee activated her magic, and the group teleported onto the creature. Miso awaited Sang-Yun's command, and he asked them to cover the rear, while he advanced against the giant Cyclops. The monster prepared to strike him like a baseball, but Miso told Taesok to use his ability. Together, with well-coordinated shots, they created an opening for Sang-Yun to strike with precision. Next, Sang-Yun called out to Johee, who quickly made another move. The Cyclops thought it had won when it saw him vanish, but by the time it smiled, it was already too late. Sang-Yun reappeared on the monster's shoulder, holding his longsword. Johee was preparing another attack, but the swordsman activated his demonic strike, a skill that caused stun and terrified monsters. With it, he tore off a chunk of the Cyclops as if making meat skewers. The spectacle left Johee and Taeseok stunned. They barely had time to help and wanted to understand what Sang-Yun had done. They thought one strike wouldn't be enough to kill a Cyclops, and Sang-Yun even apologized, thinking he'd gone too far. But they weren't criticizing, just impressed. Kim Miso commented that she had the same reaction the first time she saw him fight and believed he still hadn't revealed his full power. The way she spoke awakened in Sang-Yun the desire to reveal all his cards. Even though it was their first exploration together, the teamwork was working incredibly well. Sang-Yun was impressed with the level of the experienced players and had a good feeling about the team. But soon more Cyclopes appeared, proving that life wasn't as sweet as a cup of acai with condensed milk and peanut candy. In the next scene, several Cyclopes were lying dead on the ground, and Taesok had started to revere Sang-Yun, admitting he was amazing, by far the best swordsman he'd ever worked with. Sang-Yun was grateful for that, while Miso was happy to see he had given Taesok the chance to unleash his full potential, something that rarely happened. To her, it was Sang-Yun's merit for enabling that balance within the group. The swordsman reflected that maybe it was like that for most mages, since without a reliable ally on the front line, they were often limited to support roles. Still, he thought it was all a bit exaggerated. At that moment, Miso wanted to know which skill he had used, because even though she was used to his surprises, he always found a way to impress her. As they talked, they kept pushing forward in their war against the monsters. Suddenly, a different enemy appeared, the entwined demonic ogre, and that was a big problem for them. Miso believed they should concentrate all firepower on the monster, but before she could organize a strategy, Sang-Yun asked Johee to open a portal and launch him directly in front of the creature. The decision surprised everyone, especially Miso, who knew how specialized that enemy was in defense. Still, when she noticed the swordsman was preparing something, she decided to trust him completely. Johee followed the request, and Sang-Yun charged in using full thrust, a technique that concentrated a huge amount of energy and released it all at once, causing massive damage but leaving all movements restricted during cooldown. Sword in hand, he dashed at the ogre, while Taeseok and Miso watched in shock, unable to believe what they were seeing. The swordsman charged in smiling, as if it were all easy. He finished off the entwined demon ogre, leaving Miso impressed, as she had never seen such a powerful movement skill. Sang-Yun thought he could start using this kind of technique more aggressively now that he had such a reliable team. However, before they could celebrate, Johee asked for silence. She sensed the presence of another enemy. Just ahead, they found Cerberus, the mid-boss of the Frozen Hell, who was sleeping. The fact that it was asleep brought some relief, as they could plan their next steps. Sang-Yun smiled, excited, as he had found his punching bag and planned to use a special skill capable of permanently stunning dogs or wolves. While the three companions were discussing strategies, Sang-Yun got up and began walking toward Cerberus, leaving everyone confused. Miso, who already knew his expressions well, realized he had that same look he always had before acting on his own. Taeseok wanted to know if there was a plan, and the swordsman confirmed, asking them only to watch from where they were. He didn't have time to explain all the details, but he knew that to activate the effects of the skill Night of the Wolves, the moon needed to be fully visible. Even a single cloud would cut the effect in half. Although he felt a bit guilty for not explaining anything to his teammates, he believed it would be faster to apologize than to ask for permission. So, he continued towards Cerberus, which up close looked a lot less cute than when it was sleeping. Miso panicked, thinking they should prepare support attacks, while Johee noticed something strange. The monster wasn't reacting. The swordsman then realized Cerberus was simply obeying him. The system confirmed that the creature recognized him as someone of a higher level, entering total obedience mode. Sang-Yun hadn't expected it to be that easy. Soon after, the system congratulated him for defeating the mid-boss, although he felt a bit guilty for eliminating something so obedient. As a reward, he received a C-rank title called Reduction, which allowed him to choose one skill to have its cooldown time cut in half. He thought it would be perfect to combine that with his recovery ability. Shortly after, Miso returned with the other two, and Sang-Yun asked if something was wrong. At that moment, a stone began to glow intensely, surprising him. He realized he had never explained his skills to the others, since he had always been alone and never imagined he'd have to justify himself. He was afraid Miso would demand the artifact, but to his surprise, she did the opposite. She declared that since he had defeated Cerberus alone, he had the right to keep the reward. Sang-Yun thanked her happily, though he still wondered if she had told the others anything. But there was no need. Both Ju-hee and Tae-seok admired him deeply. Even so, the swordsman was only thinking about how to use his abilities without drawing attention. Miso then said they would continue forward, which confused him until he realized what she meant. She knew that every time Sang-yun received an artifact, he did something unexpected with it, and this time would be no different. Sang-yun asked if Miso knew about his secret, and she explained that she had discovered it a long time ago, right after a mission they had completed. That day, when she was about to leave, she wondered what he would do alone and looked back, discovering everything. The swordsman felt bad about it, knowing that a player's unique skill was like their heart. When he thought about trying to explain, Miso commented that he was the type to perform rituals, remembering when she saw him rub his face on the newly acquired artifact. To her, that wasn't a problem, since players like that appeared from time to time. Sang-yun was incredulous, but Miso made it clear he didn't need to worry and could perform his ritual without shame. If she were in his place, she would also hide such an important secret. The three then decided to give the swordsman some privacy, and in the end, despite the misunderstanding, Sang-yun acknowledged that it could have been worse if his secret had been exposed. So, he accepted the situation and kept the artifact called Heart of Ice, whose special effect was freezing. Soon after, the scene shifted to Ju-hee, using her magic and warning that this would be the last move. Miso and Sang-yun thanked her, since the success had only been possible thanks to her contribution. Even so, the mage seemed concerned, unsure if the boss would really appear to feed on the accumulated ogre corpses. Sang-yun, however, believed the creature would do anything for food, which left Ju-hee confused about how he could be so sure. Not knowing how to explain, he simply asked Tae-seok to prepare the attack, but received no response. The scene shifted to everyone sitting on the ground. It had been 20 minutes, and the boss still hadn't appeared. Even so, Sang-yun remained confident. Then, suddenly, he was surprised as the boss finally appeared. Everyone quickly stood up to fight against the Great Cold Grizzly, the final boss of that region. The scene shifted to a later moment, while the battle was still ongoing. Since Miso was a long-range player, she kept her distance, firing attacks. She acknowledged that, up to that point, all victories had been possible thanks to Sang-yun, but she knew this fight was different, much more dangerous. The swordsman was on the brink of death, and yet he was smiling. The scene then rewound a few minutes, to when no one could quite understand what he meant, even though he believed he had been clear. Sang-yun wanted to act as bait, even if the team couldn't grasp that, because he believed they had no other choice. This would be the fastest and safest way to end the adventure. He explained that most giant monsters shared a common trait, something triggered when their health dropped to a certain point, causing them to enter a state known as gluttony. A monster in that state became stronger and extremely violent, devouring everything around it. That's why they had brought the ogre corpses. But if something was added to the food, the result might be different. While Ju-hee stacked the bodies using her portals, the others were gathering junipero wood, a powerful sedative. The only problem was that to trigger gluttony, they had to lower the monster's health enough, which required a favorable situation to deal damage. And Sang-yun's job was precisely that. He just wanted the three of them to trust him this time. The scene returned to the present, where the swordsman recognized that the plan was terrible. As he was now one step from death, he began to question whether he had matured enough to come up with something so idiotic, thinking he could withstand attacks at that level, but he couldn't understand why the frost grizzly bear was so absurdly strong. He started to wonder if his strength stat still wasn't enough, because if this continued, he might actually die for real. From that point on, he would have to dodge every attack. Even though it was incredibly difficult, Sang-yun managed to dodge all the final boss's attacks. But the bear's reflexes were lightning fast, which made him regret jumping. At that moment, Miso quickly fired her arrows, hitting the boss and signaling Sang-yun, who realized he was only alive thanks to her. He then charged up his full charge strike and managed to land a hit on the monster, also activating his new skill, which caused the frost grizzly bear to freeze. He was happy it worked, as he had doubts due to the enemy's resistance. He struck again, triggering his demonic strike. Right after, Miso signaled Tae-seok, who unleashed his ability with fury, wanting Sang-yun to get out of the way. He activated a technique called Blue Flame Flamingo, which looked like a Kamehameha. The firepower surpassed all of Sang-yun's expectations, and he believed they had finally lowered the monster's HP enough. Blood began to stream from the frost grizzly bear's eyes, and its energy started to shift. Its fangs became even sharper, a clear sign that gluttony had been triggered, just as planned. Miso looked worried, knowing the monster would now try to devour everything nearby. The final boss spotted Sang-yun immediately, who wondered whether gluttony always turned monsters into such grotesque creatures. Now it was Ju-hee's turn, who was still preparing her skill. Miso asked Tae-seok if Ju-hee would make it in time, but to him the bigger concern was whether Sang-yun would survive, as the swordsman was desperately fleeing from the frost grizzly bear. Sang-yun realized that Ju-hee still wasn't ready, and knew they couldn't afford to fail, as it would be deadly. Suddenly, he was surprised when the final boss jumped high into the air, making it impossible to dodge. He would have to face the attack head-on. Without wasting time, he used his skill called Psychedelic. Then, Then, Ju-hee announced she had finished the preparations and activated the teleport. She succeeded, and the frost grizzly bear vanished. However, it took a toll on her, and she collapsed to her knees, worrying the others. But she explained she was fine, just exhausted her mana. Sang-yun could hardly believe the danger he had just survived. If he hadn't landed the blow, the monster could have devoured him. In the end, the frost grizzly bear had been deeply sedated by the suspicious juniper of the snowy mountain. The four of them managed to execute part of the plan and then went to where the bear was. Since the monster was motionless and badly injured, it bled out and collapsed like a ham on the ground. With that, they completed the unidentified portal known as Frozen Hell. Miso was thankful to the swordsman for everything he had done. Sang-yun gained a massive amount of experience and leveled up a lot. That dungeon had been more intense than expected, and he had already lost count of how many times he almost died in there. Soon, Ju-hee emerged through one of her portals, happy with the team's performance. Sang-yun wanted to thank her for going along with that last-minute crazy plan. To Ju-hee, it had been a great opportunity to test the limits of her skill. Sang-yun hoped they'd have another chance to work together in the future, as he was truly grateful to all of them. They had trusted his reckless ideas, and he admitted it would have been too much if they hadn't agreed to go with him. His past explorations always ended in tragedy, and although most portals with good rewards had a 90% survival rate when explored by experienced teams, the remaining 10% always seemed to fall on him and his groups. He could only believe it was coincidence that he was still alive after everything. A hero's job always took place in the face of death, and although becoming stronger was important, Sang-yun thought that if he had to give another purpose to his life, it would be to prevent any unnecessary deaths. After that, they decided to check the rewards. The first clear bonus was activated for Sang-yun, and suddenly the goddess of luck insisted that he pay attention while she revealed the truth behind his powers. The swordsman realized the constellation was confident and even got excited, as he would receive a unique artifact and could even choose from a list. This left him completely stunned. He had suspected it, but the weight of receiving something of unique rank was on another level. Thanks to the goddess of luck's authority, a hidden effect exclusive to unique or higher rank artifacts was unlocked, something he had almost forgotten, even though it was one of the terms of their contract. While the others were busy checking their rewards, Sang-yun decided to make his choice. He didn't need much time to think, as he already knew what he wanted. He picked up the Great Sword of the Fighting Spirit, which had a hidden effect called Recoil Break, concealing not only great power, but also the blessings of the wind, generating an aura that granted the user a 10% recovery rate. The attributes truly lived up to the reputation of a unique artifact. When he tried to wield the sword, Sang-yun was startled by its weight and couldn't understand why. Due to his artifact-devouring ability, all skill effects had been altered, and the lightness effect had been halved, causing every equipped artifact to weigh 100 kilograms. It felt like falling into an unexpected trap, as he had seen this condition before. Miso grew concerned and asked if something had happened, but he brushed it off, saying everything was fine. Looking around, he noticed that everyone had received excellent rewards with artifacts that matched their respective classes very well. Everyone was deeply grateful to the protagonist and believed that none of it would have been possible without Sang-yun, so they decided to give him the boss's corpse and the magic stones. He didn't feel it was necessary, but Ju-hee in particular insisted that he should keep everything. In the end, he understood her point and didn't want to believe his teammates could be that generous, especially since the boss's corpse was worth a lot of money. Even so, he couldn't bring himself to smile at that moment and had to hold it in, as everyone began to worry about the strange expression that suddenly appeared on his face. Then the scene shifted to the Chunui Station portal on the main street. Sang-yun thought they could celebrate another time, as he wanted to take the opportunity to assess the value of everything. The three of them were confident they would see the swordsman again soon, and Sang-yun felt truly grateful for everything. Miso wanted to know if she could call him whenever she wanted, and awkwardly, he made it clear he had no problem with that. Pleased with the answer, Miso said goodbye, while Sang-yun simply wished the three of them a safe return, never imagining he would see Kim Miso show such happiness in that way. Then, the scene shifts to an alley near the portal at Chunui Station, where Sang-yun was sitting on the ground. He had absorbed the power of the extinguished greatsword and now met the conditions for lightness. That way, the effect had been reactivated. Even so, he didn't gain much from it, because the sword didn't have bonus attributes. After all, there was a condition about lightness that didn't apply to several artifacts of the same type. Now that this was resolved, Sang-yun wanted to see how far he could go. He looked at his new ability called Explosive Knockback, which was the hidden skill. It depended on the opponent's resistance to determine the success rate of the push. He had also gained the title Clever Hunter, which was C-ranked. and allowed him to recover 1 stamina point every time he defeated a monster of small size or larger. His attributes had increased significantly just by switching a single sword. On top of that, he had earned 2 new titles and a new ability. In the end, that portal had been a real treasure for him. He decided to raise his luck to 200, and the critical hit owner title was adjusted because of it. Now he could deal up to 600% maximum critical damage. He had reached that point much faster than in his past life, so he decided to keep up that pace. He was now searching for Gyunsu's phantom blade, but behind him was a very strange energy. The atmosphere around him was gradually growing uneasy. He was also planning to get revenge on Shin Taeri next time, but it was at that moment that he noticed the energy behind him, which made him a bit uneasy. That familiar pattern indicated that new constellations were seeking his presence. The Lion King showed great interest in Sang Yun's swordsmanship. The owner of a fine beard tried to ease his fighting spirit, and the Dark Huntress questioned the presence of someone like him in that world. The Goddess of Luck thought those candidates weren't bad, and that Sang Yun's value was truly skyrocketing. Seeing those 3 constellations appear before him again so quickly was something Sang Yun hadn't expected. Maybe it was thanks to his ridiculously high growth rate, but he also believed the main reason was the sociability of the Goddess of Luck. He checked which constellations had appeared, and confirmed that both the Lion King and the owner of a fine beard were well-known, real-life heroes who had become constellations. Still, both made him uncomfortable. That confused the constellations. The Lion King even gave him a lecture for staring at them too long. Meanwhile, the owner of a fine beard felt like cutting the swordsman's head off, but said he would only do that if he were still a general. That left Sang Yun feeling awkward, and he apologized. This was why he hated hero-type constellations. But then there was also the Dark Huntress, who was even more dangerous. She was the last constellation Sang Yun ever wanted to meet in this life. She was a bounty hunter who constantly checked the system for updates and wandered around looking for players who had received extreme benefits due to system errors, or who had committed serious rule violations. There had been cases like that in his past life. Unlike unique cases such as the Goddess of Luck, the Dark Huntress relentlessly hunted high-level players with dual contracts, to the point that some were broken or ruined, which was quite terrifying for Sang Yun. So he became quite frustrated, not liking any of those constellations. Forming a contract with a constellation was very important. He knew that, since such a contract could completely change a player's future. That's why the choice truly mattered. But at that moment, the Goddess of Luck was more than enough for Sang Yun. Still, he wasn't sure if that meant he should now aim for something even greater. After all, mythical constellations were extremely rare, and only a few players in all of history had formed contracts with one. These beings were literally mystical, and even though Sang Yun loved to gamble, at that moment he had no choice. So he made it clear that he wouldn't choose anyone that day, even apologizing to the 3 constellations, surprising them all. The Lion King had never been treated like that, and stormed off in rage. The owner of a fine beard considered making another visit because he found Sang Yun truly interesting. In the end, no matter how many times he returned, the swordsman's answer wouldn't change. As for the Dark Huntress, she also left, but not before leaving a warning, saying she would uncover his secrets someday. Obviously, that was a big problem for Sang Yun. Even if he didn't want to deal with it, there wasn't much he could do. He knew he would have to be careful with constellations from now on. In any case, it was about time. It was 11:25 p.m. Sang Yun thought he could still make it. The monsters that would appear in the next portal were packs of kobolds. And just like Cerberus, they also fell into the category of dogs and wolves. Sang Yun didn't want to miss the opportunity to take some of them down. He knew that going through 3 explorations in a row wouldn't be easy, but he didn't care and was ready to dive in. His idea was to keep going until even the medical constellations became interested in him. Then the scene shifts to near Jamsil Station, where the mission area was located on level B4 of the Player Association. Inside the Portal Management Agency, a woman answered the phone thinking it would be a routine call, but she was surprised to learn that a portal had opened at exit 1 of Bupyeong Station. Now, all available combatants had to act immediately. The situation had been confirmed, but the most surprising part was that someone was already fighting there. The receptionist was shocked to hear this. A girl explained everything to her, saying there was a man fighting the monsters alone, and even though it was extremely dangerous, he didn't seem to be in danger at all. Obviously, it was Sang Yun, who was fighting the monsters with a smile on his face. That space between realities, created 11 years ago during the first rift, was different from normal dungeons and portals. It was an unpredictable disaster that allowed monsters to cross into the human world. At that moment, several kobolds were coming out of the portal, but this wasn't unpredictable for Sang Yun. The scene flashes back 10 minutes earlier. He remembered clearly that as soon as he passed that exit, the portal would appear, and suddenly the rift opened right in front of him. The rift started there, and he remembered it clearly for a very specific reason. That rift had been a true tragedy, causing the deaths of countless civilians. But now, Sang Yun, who had witnessed it all in the past, was standing there, and he wouldn't let it happen again. He even felt happy to have returned, because ever since he was born, sworn he had grown up in an orphanage and didn't remember what his parents looked like. Even so, he had never felt sad or depressed about it, but he still knew the pain of losing someone. That's why he believed they should never be forgotten. His most important goal now was to become stronger, so he drew his longsword and charged toward the kobolds. The effect of his ability intimidated the kobolds, which satisfied Sang Yun. It was proof that his skill was working. Still, it didn't show the same results as it had against Cerberus, probably due to the absence of the moon, which was now completely covered. That's why the enemies weren't submitting to his presence like before. In the end, for Sang Yun, that wasn't a bad thing. In fact, it made everything even better because now he had the chance to test his new skills. He charged at the kobolds using full rush, and with a single attack, he struck several at once. Then, he used explosive knockback together with full rush, causing massive destruction in that place. He was surprised to realize that knockback affected a much larger area than expected. The combination of powers had truly made a huge impact and gave him a major advantage in battle. That was perfect for Sang Yun's area of effect attacks. In addition, his luck attribute increased the damage of his critical hits. Now, several kobolds were injured and weakened. Since they hadn't died from a single blow, the swordsman figured he hadn't landed a lethal strike. So this time, he decided to go all in with maximum damage, leaving the kobolds completely desperate. Then, the scene shifts to a white van where two men were inside. One of them quickly stepped out and informed the people nearby that they were from the Player Association, asking who had made the call. That man's name was Lee Hyun. He was level 110 with a B+ rank. The woman who had made the call stepped forward and explained there were monsters in the area. Lee Hyun just wanted everyone taken to a safe place, but his companion caught his attention, believing they should check something else first. The man in glasses with Lee Hyun was Lee Jung, level 90 and B ranked, also a member of the Korean Player Association. Lee Hyun was stunned when he saw Sang Yun fighting the kobolds. The swordsman didn't seem to be struggling at all. That's when Lee Hyun realized they were facing a kobold rift, so the two decided they would assist Sang Yun and then figure out what to do with him afterward. But Sang Yun made it clear that he was fine and that no one should come any closer. This left the two players from the association a bit startled. The swordsman clearly showed he wanted to take them all down by himself, so he activated his title Confrontation and also used his psychedelic skill. He wanted to test the explosive knockback with all of his buffs stacked to see what would happen afterward. With a precise blow, he struck a massive kobold, sending the creature flying through the air until it crashed into the rift. Then, the monster fell to the ground like a slab of meat. Lee Hyun and Lee Jung were completely shocked by what they were seeing, but they recognized Shin Sang-yun and were grateful that no casualties had occurred. They considered it a miracle that he had withstood a rift on his own. They wanted to know if he intended to enter the rift, and if so, Lee Hyun asked to go along. Lee Jung was worried about that request since entering a rift was extremely dangerous. Lee Hyun promised he wouldn't get in the way and only wanted to observe how Sang-yun hunted. In the end, Sang-yun smiled and agreed to take them. He considered them rookies and wanted to show them his true power. Then the scene shifts to the interior of the rift at Bupyeong Station, where they were already at least halfway through. Sang-yun kept advancing, destroying every kobold in his path. The two players from the Korean Player Association were practically dead just from trying to keep up with Sang-yun's pace. Lee Jung couldn't understand how he could move so fast, but Lee Hun was less soft than his partner and thought Lee Jung should stop focusing on such things and keep running. He also believed Lee Jung hadn't properly observed the battle outside. To Lee Hyun, Sang-yun seemed to have been blessed with incredible combat instincts or something similar, so they decided to continue observing from a distance and learn from him. Lee Jung still found it very suspicious how much health the swordsman had left after that battle. In the end, Sang-yun believed that throughout his current life as a player, he had always trusted in himself, but during that last fight, things had been genuinely difficult to handle. The scene then flashes back to 30 minutes earlier, at the entrance of the rift, where the two players from the association were terrified by what they were seeing. There were countless monsters just waiting for the right moment to attack. Among them were several kobold archers. Sang-yun quickly ordered the two to stay behind him. The swordsman had already anticipated that this would happen, so he had brought a corpse with him, using the body to take the hits in their place. Lee Jung was extremely frightened. Sang-yun began to wonder if he had made a mistake by bringing them, since he couldn't act freely while needing to protect them. Even so, he didn't want to act weak and decided he would push through the situation. After all, this was the only way to become a ranker. So, he grabbed his sword and rushed toward one of the kobold archers, killing it quickly, and catching the others by surprise. Instead of focusing on him, the kobolds just stared at their fallen comrade. It was at that moment that Sang-yun used his full rush ability, destroying several monsters at once and informing the two players that they had reached the second floor. Suddenly, a giant kobold tried to attack him, and he was only able to block it by luck. If he had completely dropped dropped his guard, he would have ended up as that monster's next meal. That enemy was known as the Kobold Champion. Sang Yun didn't expect such a strong boss to be waiting on the second floor. To his surprise, the beast charged at him again using a shield, and he wasn't sure if explosive knockback alone could stop the attack. Risking his body would be far too dangerous, so he decided to try reducing the impact while blocking. He drove his sword directly into the shield and managed to hit the Kobold Champion. Even he was surprised by the damage he'd done. The monster was known for its high defense. He had no idea how it was so easy. Sang Yun believed he didn't have the necessary attributes for something like that and thought maybe it had just been brute force from the great sword of the spirit of combat. The other kobolds were stunned to see the Kobold Champion fall. Sang Yun's confidence grew, and he began to wipe out all the other enemies while the two men from the association watched from a distance, surrounded by monsters. In the end, after that agony, pieces of kobolds were scattered everywhere. Sang Yun found a platinum artifact called Swift Shoes, which made the wearer 3 times faster on difficult terrain, extremely useful gear. It was the perfect moment to find something like that. Kobolds are more possessive than goblins and tend to carry rare artifacts. The shoes fit Sang Yun's feet perfectly, which would make the exploration much easier. He then looked at the two players on the ground, covered in blood and frightened, and thought they were even better than he had imagined. He kept moving forward, while the two followed behind. He felt this rift exploration was turning out easier than expected. During the walk, he found some rare artifacts worth about 150 million, but suddenly felt a disgusting aura. Even so, he was relieved because he had finally found what he was looking for. He was in the central chamber where the king's treasure was kept, but what he saw left him completely stunned. A pile of gold coins. He just wanted to understand if it was real, even considering taking it all and retiring for good. As he observed the treasure, a creature positioned above had already taken aim at him with a crossbow ready to fire. As soon as the kobold launched the shot, the explosion was so powerful that it caused major destruction. But Sang Yun, with his longsword in hand, charged at the creature and noticed it had made a stealth attack. Since it was always the same pattern, he was getting tired of it. He tried to hit the massive kobold with everything he had, but even at close range, the kobold managed to dodge. It was as if it had purposely lured Sang Yun in, and once again, while the swordsman was still in the air, the kobold tried to shoot him with its crossbow. That was the final boss known as the Kobold King Emperor. With every passing second, the final boss surprised Sang Yun even more. He had to act quickly to dodge one of the Emperor's arrows, and was forced to activate his full charge. If he hadn't used the skill, he would have been hit directly. Both of them crashed to the ground, and Sang Yun was already fed up with the boss's antics. He found it all extremely irritating. Li Hyun and Li Jung arrived late at that moment. Li Hyun was surprised that the swordsman was already facing the boss, and they both apologized for the delay. But upon seeing the final boss, they were completely shocked. Their wide eyes clearly showed the impact of that presence. The pressure the Kobold King Emperor exerted was surreal. He intimidated both of them with his skill called King's Gaze. Li Hyun couldn't understand what that monster was. He simply couldn't move. Before the boss could do anything to them, Sang Yun attacked, feeling offended for being ignored. He wasn't affected by the same status effects as the others because he possessed the recovery skill, which removed all negative effects. He managed to strike the boss with his longsword. The blow was brutal, and the boss felt it, but due to his resistance, the swordsman's demonic strike didn't activate. That previous intimidation, which had made 2 high-level players tremble, showed that the Kobold King Emperor was far stronger than the previous Goblin Lord. Sang Yun regretted not getting that skill back then, but now he was sure he would acquire intimidation. He charged again at the boss, but was caught off guard by a new barrage of shots, using his sword to block the attacks. As expected, the boss was much smarter than any monster the swordsman had faced. He understood that he had to keep his distance from full charge and was turning the battle into a war of attrition. Sang Yun remembered clearly that the cooldown of the boss's intimidation was shorter than his own recovery. If the boss realized that, he could end up dead without being able to do anything. So Sang Yun concluded he could not, under any circumstance, let the Kobold King Emperor take control of the fight. At that moment, all he could think about was finding a way to deal damage from a distance, which would make everything easier. Then he looked at the treasure scattered across the floor and got an idea. Li Jung was worried and asked if Li Hyun was okay. Hyun was, although he had never been affected by a status condition like that before, which left him a bit shaken. The two of them kept watching the fight between the swordsman and the final boss, impressed by how Sang Yun could resist the enemy's pressure. They believed he had some special skill that completely nullified negative status effects. Li Hyun believed that Sang Yun had more than one skill to escape dangerous situations, but even so, he had a strong bad feeling. Then he was surprised to notice that the arrows were sinking into the ground, the same ground that was covered in thousands of coins. Hyun started to regret not noticing it earlier and realized it was a trap, warning Sang Yun. The swordsman was already tired of that boss only using ranged attacks, so he touched the floor full of coins and was startled. The Kobold King Emperor quickly tried to fire another arrow at him, confirming it was indeed a trap. Sang Yun was hit directly, but showed the final boss that he wouldn't fall for such a dumb trick. Due to the the effect of sacrifice, the damage was completely nullified, and his health was restored. The monster hadn't noticed the moment the swordsman started taking hits without retaliating. Then, Sang-yun activated his skill called Psychedelic and used explosive knockback, causing the coins to rise and fly toward the enemy like sharp projectiles. The two members of the Korean Player Association couldn't believe their eyes when they saw the coins transform into shotgun-like blasts, and they immediately wanted to understand the true power of the knockback skill. Hyun had seen countless players until then, but never someone with such sharp combat instinct. The final boss was still standing, which irritated Sang-yun. This monster was truly persistent, so he saw no choice but to fight to the end. The strike he delivered to the Kobold King Emperor was so absurdly powerful that it split his blade in half, splattering the monster's blood like grape juice in every direction. With that, he finally defeated the final boss and gained several levels, also receiving a C-rank title called Before the Food Cools Down, created by a man with a fine beard who had the habit of saying he killed enemies before dinner. When used in a dungeon, this title granted immunity to intimidation for all players for 2 hours. It was the first time Sang-yun had ever seen a constellation title, and along with it, he obtained the Intimidate skill, which came from a platinum artifact called Talisman of Despair. He also acquired a gold artifact called Evasion Boots, specialized in rapid dodging, and a golden necklace called Tracking Necklace, whose special effect marked any enemy within a 100-meter radius with a red mark, an item made especially for the Kobold King. All those items were extremely useful to the swordsman, and he planned to take and use them when the opportunity arose. However, the two companions with him arrived in a panic, warning that they needed to leave immediately, as the rift was beginning to close. The news caught Sang-yun off guard, but he quickly remembered that rifts did close after being cleared. Still, he hadn't realized that all the treasure would be left behind, and as he was dragged out by the two, he practically cried over abandoning so much wealth. Next, the scene shifted to Bupyeong Station outside the rift. People were shocked to see 3 players come out alive, as they didn't believe anyone would survive. The rift began to close, and many were saddened by the defeated look on Sang-yun's face. He looked like he was on the verge of collapse from having to leave so much treasure behind. Reporter Jung Min quickly approached to interview him, asking what he had to say as the hero who saved Bupyeong Station. But the swordsman didn't like being called a hero, nor did he enjoy having a reporter in his face right there in the street. Soon after, the scene changed again to Player City, in the basement of Building S in Training Room 1. A few people were training there, and 3 B-rank golems had been summoned. Among them stood out a girl named Cho Lee-hyun, a level 120 mage with a B+ ranking. The battle began, and Shinteri made her powerful presence known in that place. With her swords in hand, she moved so fast that she destroyed 1 golem with ease. She then faced all 3 at once and defeated them in mere moments. Despite the victory, she was a bit disappointed by the limits of a friendly duel. The golems were beautiful and sturdy, but didn't provide the same thrill she sought. She had gone there precisely to avoid forgetting the feeling she experienced that day, the intense desire to fight Sang-yun again. Terry regretted not asking for his number or doing something similar, feeling frustrated at the missed opportunity. Suddenly, the news broadcasted breaking updates about the appearance of a rift near Bupyeong Station, which, miraculously, had been cleared by a single player. To her surprise, the reporter even managed to interview him on the scene. Watching the transmission, Terry's eyes widened in shock. She never imagined she'd see the protagonist in that way again. The scene shifted to the reporter, who asked how Sang-yun had managed to defeat a boss so far above his level all by himself, and whether it had been very difficult. The swordsman answered naturally, saying that level was important, but it wasn't the deciding factor in determining victory or defeat. Terry, watching the interview, completely agreed with him. From his tone of voice, she could tell that the swordsman was aware of his own capabilities and possessed a rare level of maturity for his age. She wondered who his master might be, considering the possibility that he had a contract with a combat constellation, or even with a god, just like she did. Then, the scene shifted to Sang-yun's home, where he was once again in the space of unconsciousness. In front of him were the artifacts that had granted him skills like Intimidate, Tracking, and Backstep. All of them were extremely useful, and he simply wanted to thank his luck attribute for having earned them, feeling that he was truly getting stronger, just as he had planned. When the era of players began, most warriors had the image of savage monsters in mind, believing that strength was everything. But that stereotype led them to self-destruction when stronger enemies emerged. When all hope was lost, the legendary Gyeongsu, known as the Sword Demon, appeared and changed the paradigm among warriors. He gave up armor for mobility, compensated for the lack of defense with superior reflexes, and instead of relying solely on brute strength, focused on useful skills, creating a balanced and adaptable fighting style, capable of responding to any situation. Sang-yun had never followed that path because he was too stubborn, but this time the situation was different. He looked at the plates of food his artifacts had turned into, a kobold forest mushroom soup and a kobold plains black black pepper steak, finding it strange that there were only 2 dishes. Soon he noticed a third one too, a seasoned orange swamp kobold larva, which he obviously hated. The scene changed again to the front of the swordsman's house, where 2 security guards were explaining to reporters that they weren't allowed to enter. Sang-yun watched the commotion from above, feeling awkward, not understanding why they were being so insistent, and wondering how they had managed to get in the last time. All he wanted was a bit of fresh air, but the noise made him nauseous, so he decided it was better to stay quiet and just rest. He had no clear plans, and maybe it was best to simply remain there. But then, he received an unexpected call. On the phone was Kim Ji-hai from the player management department, the same girl he had met outside the mission area, and now she wanted to explain why she was reaching out to him. Kim Ji-hai said it wasn't a big deal. They just wanted to present Sang-yun with a plaque for having cleared the rift. He felt a little uneasy. It was already weird enough being called a hero and now a plaque. Honestly, Sang-yun felt like it was far too little, especially considering that the rift he had cleared was just the tip of the iceberg compared to the danger that would threaten all players in the near future. He knew he still had a long journey ahead, so he decided to decline. Kim Ji-hai didn't understand, but asked if he could at least accept the dungeon priority card, explaining that it was related to the Silent Solo dungeon, which made his eyes widen upon hearing it. He couldn't believe he had been approved. Kim Ji-hae explained that thanks to his recent achievements, it hadn't been difficult to get him accepted. That was a dungeon where all monsters used the silence ability, and on top of that, he remembered having spoken to the warrior who had saved him before. That warrior kept staring at the photo of his little sister, and explained that he had a habit of doing that after everything was over, especially because it had been 10 years since she had left him. Sang-yun wanted to know what was the last dungeon the guy's sister had entered, and the answer was the Silent Solo. His sister relied mainly on skills, and everything ended before she could even do anything. It should have been simple for someone with attributes like hers, but now there was no point in holding on to regrets. Sang-yun kept watching his comrade, who just wished he could go back in time, and then told Kim Ji-hai that she could prepare the access card, because there was something he needed to do in that dungeon. Then, the scene changed to a luxury car, with Sang-yun driving that powerful machine, a modern car that drew a lot of attention. It was exactly as he had imagined. He only wanted to spend money on artifacts if possible. But last week, when he went to the rift at Bupyeong Station, he learned the hard way that he kind of liked attention, just not that kind, where he became the center of everything. Kim Ji-hai called him, since that was the day of the Silent Solo dungeon exploration. She just wanted to confirm whether he was really going, and Sang-yun was already on his way. Once he arrived, an employee would be ready to guide him. In the end, time had flown by. He had been so focused on training that he hadn't even noticed a whole week had passed since he returned from that rift. He wanted to test out his new skill, but suddenly he ran into a traffic jam and wanted to understand why. At that hour, it wasn't normal to have traffic. He had made a point of avoiding rush hour, and it looked like it would take a while to clear. He started to believe a new rift might have appeared or something like that. Then, he was surprised to see Gyeong-soo being interviewed. The location was dungeon number 21 at the Yeouido intersection. Many women were gathered around Gyeong-soo. He was quite popular. The reporter noticed and asked how he felt about receiving so much love from his fans. Gyeong-soo said he felt honored, but the reporter thought his answer was lazy. Even though he was popular, that reply really disappointed her. She asked what his strategy would be for that dungeon, and he said it would be the same as always, slicing up monsters. Upon hearing that, the reporter ended up seeing a unique charm in him. The cameraman asked her to pull herself together, and just then Sang-yun passed by in the car and was recognized. He wasn't paying attention and ended up making a mistake. Now, the news crew thought it was a special event. A meeting between a god and a rookie had just occurred. They believed it was a challenger to the throne of the Phantom Blade. Someone explained to Gyeong-soo that Sang-yun was the same guy who had recently cleared a rift solo. According to rumors, he might be a swordsman with a style similar to Gyeong-soo's. But Gyeong-soo already knew Sang-yun, and the reporters wanted to know what he was doing there. While the poor guy tried to explain it was just a coincidence. They even wanted to know the price of the car. Sang-yun really didn't want to attract Gyeong-soo's attention like that, so he started thinking of ways to handle the situation. Gyeong-soo smiled at him, which left the returned swordsman surprised. He thought he was being looked down on. He honestly didn't know what that smile meant. Even if it was just a coincidence, he felt lucky to witness something like that, because it showed how much he still had to grow. Gyeong-soo decided they should enter the portal. He had met many ambitious players up to that point, but he felt that Sang-yun was different, because he didn't look at him with admiration, but rather like someone he needed to surpass. Gyeong-soo was certain he would see that swordsman again. Then they entered dungeon number 21. The scene shifted to Sang-yun, who was arriving at the portal of dungeon code 66, known as Silent Solo. He already knew Gyeong-soo was on another level. He didn't show any openings. even while standing still. Even so, Sang-yeon understood that the bigger the goal, the more fun it was to reach it. So he promised himself that he would catch up to Kyung-soo at an astonishing pace. Then he heard a girl shouting. She also wanted to enter the silent solo dungeon and was furious to find out it was reserved exclusively for Sang-yeon, who had arrived at exactly the right time. The furious woman thought he was going too far just because he was a top ranker, believing there should be basic decency between players. Sang-yeon's relief was knowing that everything had already been reserved, but he began to doubt his own memory and started to worry. That was the day his comrade's little sister had died in silent solo. Still, he didn't expect her to be so talkative. The personality difference between the siblings was striking. But since she was like that, he decided not to hold back and asked what her problem was, because there are moments when a player needs to be firm. He was just following the schedule prepared by the association, making it clear that no matter how unfair she felt it was, she had no right to speak to him that way. He then turned his back and entered the dungeon, while the girl stood there furious at his attitude, saying she wouldn't just stand by and that he should watch out, because she knew his name very well. Hearing that annoyed him, and he even regretted getting out of bed that day. The scene then shifted to the entrance of Silent Solo, where he immediately smelled something rotten as he stepped inside, which was expected since all the monsters there were undead. One of them suddenly emerged from the ground and grabbed Sang-yeon's leg. Ghouls could activate the silence effect with just a touch, so he couldn't use any skills for half a second. Wasting no time, he drove his longsword into the ghoul. He knew he couldn't get hit even once, and needed to rely as little as possible on skills. This wasn't a regular battle, and this was exactly the kind of fight where he excelled. Right after that, the scene shifted to the Korean Players Association headquarters, in the strategy meeting room of Reconnaissance Team 4, where we are discussing Shin Sang-yeon. They already knew he had confronted Kyung-soo, and even though he had awakened just a month ago, his progress was already terrifying. A man named An-kyun, leader of Recon Team 4, had heard about Sang-yeon thanks to Hyun and Young, who wouldn't stop praising him. The team was aware that Sang-yeon was receiving a lot of public attention, and that his growth rate was incomparable to that of other players. Still, Ikyun didn't think he should be treated as someone special, since there were still far superior players like Shin Tae, Kyung-soo, and Kim Miso. A man with glasses named Shin Min-jae, the deputy leader of Recon Team 4, agreed with that, saying that impressive growth rates weren't uncommon, and he believed Sang-yeon was being praised mostly because of how he recently handled a rift on his own. Since they still didn't know the true scope of his abilities, they thought it was better to be cautious when evaluating that swordsman's accomplishments. Min-jae suspected that Sang-yeon might just be a great manipulator, but Lee Ga-hee didn't agree with that at all. Everyone was surprised that she outright disagreed with the deputy leader. Min-jae was visibly irritated, while Ga-hee apologized for interrupting and explained that Sang-yeon was a player she had been monitoring personally. As the strategist of Recon Team 4, she said she had gathered data on him over the past few days and that it would take time to analyze it all, but she recommended that everyone do the same, as it was the only way they'd understand he wasn't an ordinary player. She showed the typical growth chart of a regular player, then presented Shin Sang-yeon's projected growth chart, which was completely out of the ordinary and left many surprised. Min-jae insisted that it wasn't possible and suggested Ga-hee had lost her ability to objectively assess a player's skill level. He thought that the number of abilities could be ignored, but the titles were something else entirely, because at that rate, Sang-yeon would be growing just as fast as the sword demon Kyung-soo. After presenting her conclusion, Lee Ga-hee explained that she had also met with all of Sang-yeon's former allies. She clearly remembered asking Dae-kyung whether Sang-yeon had any strange traits, and he replied that the swordsman's abilities were unbelievable. He'd never seen anyone stunned the way Sang-yeon was, but even if that didn't exist, what made Sang-yeon special to Dae-kyung was his natural combat instinct. She had also asked Joo-hee and Tae-seok what they thought about Sang-yeon's combat sense. Both admired him and found his basic training incredible. He was far stronger than anyone at his level. Tae-seok believed this proved just how well trained he was, as if he were a veteran with years of experience. When Ga-hee asked for more detail, Tae-seok explained that it was as if Sang-yeon already knew what would happen next. His instinct to predict the opponent's actions was incredible. Everyone has moments of weakness, but that didn't seem to apply to Sang-yeon. His body moved before he even thought. Tae-seok said it was like Sang-yeon had instincts dedicated to combat, and those instincts were extremely well trained. No matter the situation, Sang-yeon always found a solution. So Lee Ga-hee told the group that what set Sang-yeon apart from others was an instinct that bordered on future prediction. She went even further, saying that his combat instincts were on the same level as most A+ ranked players, and if that factor were included in the analysis, he could be considered an S-rank player. The scene then shifted back to the protagonist, who was exhausted. There were too many monsters around. Meanwhile, Min-jae was furious with Ga-hee and asked if she really understood what it meant to be considered an S-rank player. He couldn't believe Sang-yeon had earned so many titles just by predicting rifts with that so-called future-seeing instinct. He thought it would have been easier if Ga-hee had just said said that Sang Yun had traveled back in time, and in fact, she didn't completely rule out that possibility. That's when Ikyun ordered silence, as he understood Gahi's point about Sang Yun not being an ordinary player. He then assigned her to personally keep watch over Sang Yun. Naturally, Min-jae didn't like that decision at all, while Gahi was pleased and promised to do her best. The scene then shifted to Sang Yun, who was bothered by the smell of monster blood, the stench of ghouls being the worst of all. It was hard to deal with them because they appeared out of nowhere. That's when he realized he had a skill he should have used from the start. He activated a skill called Detection, which marked all monsters within a 100-meter radius. He quickly spotted several ghouls in the area, which surprised him, since he thought he had already taken most of them down. Then he saw a fly and didn't expect it to count as a monster. When he touched it, a massive explosion occurred. It was like a kamikaze fly. He barely escaped with just a few burns because he reacted in time. Otherwise, his hand could have been completely incinerated. Since there were multiple explosive flies, he suspected a mage-type monster was nearby. If he didn't distance himself from those exploding flies, things would get ugly, and he was right. There were several skeleton mages nearby, preparing attacks. The scene then shifted to Min-jae, who was talking to Gahi, saying he understood she had high expectations for Sang Yun, but asked if she had found any data on his skills or titles. It seemed like Sang Yun had unique ways of acquiring such things. Gahi was thinking about that and had a theory. If she was right, Sang Yun was a player beyond normal comprehension. Meanwhile, Sang Yun was defending himself using a new skill called Defensive Sword, where he used his blade to form a barrier that blocked any attacks aimed at it. He saw the skeleton mages, and now it was his turn to strike. The scene flashed back to a few days earlier in the player city, Building C inside the underground training room. Sang Yun was blocking several blasts with his longsword. It had been 3 days since he started that training. Aside from special circumstances where one could consume artifacts or use special abilities, the simplest way to gain new skills was through constant training. Passive skills were easy to acquire if you knew the right training methods, but to obtain active ones, like Total Rush, that method wouldn't work. You had to repeat a strict training routine over and over. Most players didn't share that kind of knowledge, since it required specific circumstances that were almost impossible to find without luck. But that wasn't the case for Sang Yun, who had years of experience. He smiled as he saw the swarm of skeleton mages preparing more explosive flies. That defensive sword skill, which took him so long to acquire, was undoubtedly one of the best defensive abilities. The drawback was that he couldn't advance while using it. Still, Sang Yun could move and defend at the same time. He was able to bend certain system rules. He planned to use Total Rush against the skeleton mages, who were about to cast a skill called Hellfire, but it was too late for that order of mages. Sang Yun sliced through each of them with ease. After that, he found a glowing purple magic stone dropped by one of the mages. It was a high-tier stone that could sell for a lot of money. The harder the dungeon, the better the rewards. He planned to grab the stone after finishing everything. Then he used Detection again, and found only one monster left, which left him surprised. He wondered where all the others had gone. As for this last one, he didn't expect it to be right behind him. The problem was, it was too late to react. He didn't know whether the attack would come from the left, the right, or below, and regardless of direction, he'd have to give it everything to block it. He leapt into the air just as the skeletal warrior made the entire ground tremble. Sang Yun was shocked. He finally understood why the other monsters had disappeared. They had fled because that monster had arrived. It didn't matter whether it was friend or foe. That kind of monster killed everything around it. It was known as the Death Knight. The monster charged toward the swordsman. Sang Yun didn't know why that enemy was there instead of in the center of the dungeon. But the moment he came face to face with it, he felt deep down that this creature was the one who had killed his comrade's little sister. That was the mid-boss known as the Death Knight of Penance and Wrath, and Sang Yun was determined never to let something like that happen again. The battle grew intense. The Death Knight easily endured all of Sang Yun's attacks, and each strike it delivered weighed heavily on him. An undead monster, as the name suggested, was a knight born from death itself, formed when the soul of a knight fused with an immortal body. Its main ability was called Swamp of Silence, and it was always active. If Sang Yun stepped into the aura beneath the Death Knight's feet, he would be inflicted with the Silence debuff. Because of this, the association had concluded that long-range player groups were the most effective strategy for this dungeon. Using the ghoul as a reference, they estimated the Silent Ground's difficulty at level 120. However, this was the association's greatest miscalculation. The true danger of the Death Knight wasn't the Swamp of Silence, but rather the knight's soul inhabiting the body. If the soul came from a highly trained knight, the danger level increased drastically. After this was discovered, the dungeon's difficulty was revised to between A+ and S rank. At that moment, Sang Yun was hit with full force by the mid-boss and began coughing up blood. He was in real danger. He could die. That made him furious. Every time he was exhausted or on the verge of death, old habits returned. He would begin to doubt himself. If he continued like that, he would never change. So, he started provoking the Death Knight, who became enraged and chased after him as Sang Yun, with very low HP, retreated. All he needed now was a way to heal. Using his detection ability, he located some monsters monsters nearby. Since the Death Knight had wandered off, the others had fled toward the dungeon center to avoid the fight. Sang-yun ran there and found several ghouls, which he started eliminating one by one. Thanks to his Smart Hunter title, he regained HP with each enemy he defeated. He was also faster due to an artifact he'd obtained from a rift, which made it easier to dodge pursuers and continue healing that way. He kept killing ghouls as he moved deeper into the dungeon. Upon reaching the depths, he saw far more monsters than he expected and continued fighting until he had fully recovered his HP, but suddenly the Death Knight appeared behind him, catching him off guard. With a single blow, the boss wiped out several monsters at once, leaving Sang-yun distressed, as those enemies were his only means of healing. However, the knight wasn't targeting him. He had realized that the swordsman was recovering and decided to kill his own allies. Sang-yun tried to dodge another strike and used explosive knockback to counterattack, believing he had healed enough. He found an opening and rushed in, but he was mistaken. The Death Knight reappeared behind him and activated Swamp of Silence, canceling all of the swordsman's abilities. Sang-yun was hit directly, hurled against a wall, and coughed up a large amount of blood. His HP dropped dangerously low again. He had made a stupid mistake, and all his efforts were wasted, but he couldn't give up like that. Sang-yun began remembering when he lost his friend in the past, the one who, before dying, asked one last favor, to be buried beside his little sister. At that time, Sang-yun refused to accept that player's death. He believed there was still time. He said that the Shatter ability was almost over and that the rescue team was on the way. But suddenly, the man closed his eyes and fell asleep for eternity. At that moment, Sang-yun realized his thinking had been completely flawed. It was his fault for being too cautious with his own life up until the final boss. Now, he didn't want to repeat that mistake and was determined to end it once and for all. He activated his skill Psychedelic, entering a state between kill or be killed. He wasn't there just because of a goal or a past. He could no longer ignore the things he still had the power to protect. Thus, he stood face to face with the Death Knight. Even a mere scratch from that monster could peel the skin from his palm. He knew he wouldn't win a brute force battle, but now he understood something important. He had an advantage over the Death Knight. So when the mid-boss tried to attack him again, Sang-yun managed to dodge and attempted a counterattack from behind. But the enemy wasn't easy to deal with. Still, the Death Knight's strikes meant nothing if they didn't land. Sang-yun landed a critical hit, sending the Death Knight flying. He had achieved a 600% boost, and now, seeing the enemy on the ground, he just wanted the mid-boss to stop being so dramatic and get up already, because he knew it wouldn't end that easily. The Death Knight was using the last flames of his life as a sacrifice, and with that, all his physical stats increased. All Death Knights had different ability levels, but there was one thing they all shared. When their HP dropped below 10%, they entered a self-destruct state that lasted exactly 10 seconds. It was like a deadly game of hide and seek, where time decided everything.